Hello, everyone. Nice to see you on my channel, Touching Stories. Today you will hear an amazing story that is based on real events. It's a drama that will be a very important lesson for everyone.
Alice woke up to the insistent ringing of the doorbell. She got out of bed as if she had been electrocuted. She hastily searched for her key and opened the door. Carlos walked into the apartment, sat down on the poof in the hallway, and stretched out his legs without looking at Alice. Alice sat down in front of him and took off his shoes. "You have your own keys, don't you? Why don't you use them?" Alice muttered under her breath. Carlos left the question unanswered, thinking it was just another woman's stupidity. "Are you going to have dinner?" Alice asked. "What dinner? Don't you use a watch?" Carlos mumbled. Indeed. Alice looked at the clock. It showed 4:30 in the morning. Carlos got up from the ottoman and took slow steps toward the bedroom. When Alice arrived, he had already snored. In a few minutes, the room was already wrapped in the smell of alcoholic booze. Alice couldn't sleep anymore. She sat by the window until morning. In the morning, she woke up her daughter Elizabeth and took her to school. When she returned, Carlos was already awake and going to work. "Do you want breakfast?" Alice asked ingratiatingly. "Have I ever had breakfast at home?" Carlos pretended as if he had never actually had breakfast in this house. "Better run to the store and buy something cold. I'm thirsty. Although how many times have I asked you to buy some in advance and put it in the fridge?" Apparently, this was an impossible task. Carlos continued to resent him. Alice was glad that she had the good fortune to run to get a cold drink for her beloved husband. She went to the store, and in a few minutes Carlos was enjoying a cold cocktail. "How are things at work?" Alice asked. "Nothing. I've been swamped with urgent tasks again. Not a minute of peace for at least the rest of the month," Carlos said. He finished his cocktail, picked up his jacket, and went to work. After a while, Alice dialed his phone number. "Carlos, I didn't want to disturb you this morning, but I think we should talk sometime, just the two of us. We have a lot to talk about. Please find an opportunity," she said to her husband. "How many times do you have to tell me I'm swamped with work? If you want to talk, say it right away," Carlos said. "Talking about our relationship is not a 2-minute conversation on the phone. I don't think we're going to agree on anything," Alice said. "Until you learn to iron shirts properly, forget the relationship. No self-respecting man will talk about relationships if his shirt is not properly ironed." Carlos shouted into the phone and ended the conversation. Now Alice was overcome with guilt. She ran to the bedroom, opened the closet, and started looking at all of Carlos' shirts. The shirts were all clean, perfectly ironed, and smelled fresh. She couldn't figure out which unironed shirt she was talking about. It didn't even occur to her that an unironed shirt was just an excuse to brush off any conversation. Instead, Alice puzzled over those words all day. Evening came. Alice picked Elizabeth up from school, made dinner and 2 salads, then did homework with her daughter and put her to bed. It turned out that Elizabeth had eaten at school, and Alice hopelessly waited to see if maybe, just maybe, Carlos would show up on time and they would finally have a family dinner for the first time in months, maybe even years. As the clock struck midnight, she realized the futility of her expectations. She was preparing to face another restless night of staring at her phone and waiting for at least a call from Carlos. This pattern has been going on for a long time. Carlos says he is forced to work day and night, but at night, none of his coworkers have been seen working. All of Alice's attempts to talk came across as cold indifference. Alice walked into the bedroom. In front of the mirror, she saw a framed photograph of herself from 8 years ago. Here she is with a crown on her head. Around her neck is a red ribbon that reads, "Miss 2005. This is just one photo from her many beauty pageant victories. The crowns have long been gathering dust in her closet. In those years when she managed to win one contest after another, the cavaliers followed her in droves. Among them were rich men of respectable age and successful, famous, and promising young guys. Everyone around her was sure that Alice's achievements are provided by one of these men, maybe even several of them. Alice received solid fees, but people around her were sure that this money was a gift from rich suitors. This really hurt Alice, so she promised herself every time that she would build a relationship only for love and only with a simple guy. She wanted to prove to everyone that she is not a frivolous fury, but a normal, serious girl, capable of unconditional love and be a faithful companion. In the end, that's exactly what happened. She and Carlos met by chance. He was in his last year of university and was working part-time as a waiter in a cafe. Handsome brunette with a suspended tongue quickly found the way to the heart of the recognized beauty. Alice idealized their relationship, a beauty queen and a simple, promising guy. Such a union seemed to Alice something fabulously romantic. True, Alice noticed the uneasy character of Carlos, but wrote it all off to the individual characteristics of the man. Friends twirled their fingers at the temple. Some even persistently discouraged the relationship with this insolent young man. But Alice did not listen to anyone. After a while, Carlos said that Alice should leave the modeling business and do something serious. Alice did not resist. Thankfully, she had a good education as a linguist. In the end, she got a good position in an international company. But Carlos wasn't happy with that either. He was always criticizing her work. "Foreigners must be looking at you and drooling. That's why you become so uppity," Carlos reprimanded. Alice was very flattered by this. She thought that if a guy was jealous, he loved her. Sometimes she did notice the extra attention from her management and his partners. Carlos didn't always talk it all out, but he never forgot a single instance. After getting his degree, Carlos got a job at a bank. After that, Alice decided that their relationship needed to be taken to the next level. So, after a couple months, it turned out that Alice was pregnant. Carlos was not thrilled with this news, but also did not actively oppose marriage, so began their joint family life. After the birth of Elizabeth, Carlos quickly moved up the career ladder and became one of the favorites of his boss. Alice had to stay at home for a while. During this period, their relationship changed. Although Carlos was not known for his warm attitude towards his wife before, now he began to openly neglect her. He could go on vacation with friends for a few days without warning or not come home at all for several days in a row. Alice looked to herself for blame. A man goes left when his wife can't give him something, her friends convinced her. Alice couldn't find it and continued to suffer. In the end, several years passed unnoticed, hoping to find what Carlos lacked in his family's relationships. Each day was similar to the previous one. After work, Carlos goes out with friends. Alice cooks dinner and together with her daughter wait for him at home. Carlos comes only in the morning. One day, Alice was overcome by curiosity. She stealthily crept to Carlos's phone and began to study his correspondence. She noticed that he was calling and texting a contact named Olivia the most. Turns out Alice knows this Olivia. She's an aspiring singer. She used to be Alice's competitor in one of the beauty pageants. Unlike Alice, Olivia wasn't neglecting any of her suitors. Carlos became close to her after his management sponsored Olivia's concert. In the process of organizational work, he was able to attract the attention of an aspiring singer and gradually became her best friend. Alice, of course, did not know about it. After studying her husband's cell phone, Alice dialed her friend's number. "Katie, hi. I don't think I have any more questions for Carlos. He's hanging out with Olivia. Maybe you don't remember her. You crossed paths with her at the pageant too. What am I gonna do?" Alice sobbed. "What do you think? What does a decent woman do when she finds out her husband has cheated on her?" Katie didn't know what to say, so she decided to just help her friend talk. "A decent woman, I think, would put all emotions aside and fight for her family," Alice said. "To be honest, it was expected from your Carlos," Kathy said. "Kathy, I don't understand why no one believes in our relationship. Everyone has been skeptical from the beginning. He and I have been together for 9 years and still nothing has changed. Why is that?" "Maybe it is this skepticism that has had a negative effect on Carlos," Alice asked. "My dear, the meaning of love and relationships is that they are built and exist against all odds. Could it be that the people around you were noticing something that you were stubbornly turning a blind eye to?" Katie put Alice in front of deep thought. Alice realized that seeking comfort from a close friend was a futile endeavor. Since she had decided to fight, she would fight. As time went on, Carlos came home in the morning. He even stopped hiding his cell phone and quietly left it on the table. Right after he came home, Olivia could text him to say good night or thank him for his support at the next concert. New Year's Eve was approaching. Alyssa made plans to spend the holiday without Carlos and made up an explanation for her daughter in case she asked why her father didn't stay with her even on a family holiday. A few days before the new year, Carlos announced that this time Alice would go to the corporate party with him. It had never happened before. Alyssa rejoiced. She had a ray of hope that maybe Carlos had finally come to his senses and decided to become a model family man. For the corporate party, she chose a luxurious dress with a deep neckline on the back. She created the image of a European aristocrat at the end of the last century, carefully thinking through every detail. Indeed, this image perfectly suited her facial type. Unfamiliar people might have thought that it is a famous actress in the middle of the shooting process went for a walk outside. Corporate party was held in one of the elite restaurants of the city. Alice came down from heaven to earth when she found out that coming with her other half was a prerequisite for the current corporate party. The staff of the bank had already organized parties in different styles, and when the options ran out, someone suggested holding a party in the traditional style. Therefore, all 250 employees of the bank came with their other halves. Carlos, as the boss's favorite John, sat at the same table with him. Ariana, the boss's wife, was also in the same company. Ariana was a pretty middle-aged woman. She was like her husband in every way. And John was a solid man in his 60s with a noble gray hair on his head. They say that if a man is lucky in life, then over the years he becomes more attractive and charismatic. This could be said of John. Each of those seated introduced their other halves to the audience. The evening was promising. Champagne poured by the river. Exotic appetizers were served by the mountains. The program provided all kinds of racy spectacles, including male and female striptease. Well, and the remarkable part of the evening was the performance of singer Olivia. This rising star of show business was not distinguished by a unique voice or poetic gift. Her popularity slowly grew. And it's no coincidence if instead of talent, everything is built around connections and money. That's all there is to say about the singer Olivia. When the audience was drunk enough, the most interesting part began. The young people did not leave the dance floor. The rest gathered in small groups and made pathos toasts. As the evening approached its midpoint, the Toastmaster announced the performance of Olivia, a rising pop star. Carlos, who had been sitting next to Alice, jumped out onto the dance floor at that moment and didn't return for the rest of the evening. When Olivia finished singing, Carlos accompanied her backstage. Alice was prepared for this turn of events. As soon as Carlos stepped away from her, she noticed that John didn't take his eyes off her. Ariana noticed this as well. She gave Alice an arrogant look and left to dance with one of the young bank employees. Alice pulled out her cell phone and started flipping through it helplessly to pass the time. She noticed out of the corner of her eye when John got up from the table and walked by her purposely to touch her shoulder with his hand. Alice decided to write it off as an accident. After a while, through the noise of the loud music, there was shouting on the dance floor. Someone ran out of the crowd, grabbed a bottle from the table and hid in the crowd again. After a moment, the whole crowd started to scatter around. What's a corporate party without a fight? Someone who was sitting down exclaimed solemnly. When the music was turned off, Alice clearly heard hysterical female screams. She decided to come closer and find out what was going on. In the center of the dance floor, a certain woman is holding tightly by the hair a girl who is sitting on the floor. The people around her seem hesitant to come closer and separate the two women. Someone's shoe is lying not far from this picture. Both women are screaming and interrupting each other. Alice comes closer and hears another male voice speaking in a calmer tone. Ariana, stop it. What are you making up again? Am I making it up? No, darling, it's you as usual. Okay, when I'm back here, you can do whatever you want. But why the hell are you inviting me to your corporate party and groping your slut in front of me? Alice couldn't believe her ears. The woman who grabbed the girl's hair was Ariana. Standing next to her is her husband, the boss of this whole collective, John. Alyssa became genuinely curious to discern who was between them. She really didn't know this girl, so she directly asked one of the dumbfounded onlookers about it. What's going on here? Who is this girl who is on the floor? What did she do wrong? Oh, that's our Julianne. She's the boss's secretary, and also his mistress for the season. And next to her, I'm sorry, who are you? It seems that the drunken bank employee came to her senses a little and asked who she was giving all these office secrets to. "My name is Alice. I'm Carlos' wife," Alice said. "So Alice, standing next to her is Ariana, John's spouse." Apparently, she was unaware that John had changed mistresses a month ago. Now it seems she found out, the unfamiliar drunken employee said and hiccuped loudly. Alice walked to her table, picked up her purse, and left the festive restaurant room. Carlos didn't even notice her leaving the event. Alyssa decided to take a walk home. At that moment, she got a call from her friend Kathy. "So tell me, how was the corporate evening with the bankers going?" "It's fine. I'd already gone home. Carlos is all over that Olivia girl. I think he's gonna stay with her till morning. And his boss John is breaking up his wife and his mistress in the middle of the room. All the other 500 guests are watching and filming it on their phones," Alice said. "Wow. Why didn't you stay till the end? A show like that and you didn't bother to watch it." Katie laughed into the phone. "Yeah, nothing surprising there." "Alice, is it okay for you to let your Carlos do that to you too?" Katie asked. "I wouldn't want to go over this for the 100th time. I've already told you and everyone else my position. So far, nothing has changed," said Alice. "I'm sorry, darling, but I think you're either stupid or Maeve. No respectable woman would allow herself to be treated like that. He's out in the open with that singer. You don't say a word. He comes home when he wants, you tolerate it. He goes around her in front of you, you turn away silently. He's just realized you're so soft. He can't get away with it. So he keeps humiliating you," Katie said. "No, Katie, it might look that way from the outside. I love Carlos. The most important thing to me is that he's happy. I knew from the beginning that he was a free spirit. If it makes him happy, then so be it. Forcing him to be faithful won't make him happy," Alice said. "That's your philosophy. It only sounds pretty in words. But in reality, it drains you of energy, makes you a miserable victim. And all for what? You think he'll appreciate it and thank you someday. Don't think I'm prying into your personal affairs. I just want to see you happy too," said Katie. "I have Elizabeth. I have a job I love. All my loved ones are alive and well. What kind of guy?" "Well, from what I can tell, this John is a very complicated man. He probably grew up in a troubled family. He probably had a difficult relationship with his mother. Despite the large number of women in his life, none of them could really hook him. He treats his spouse as a necessary formality. Deep down, he is not satisfied with his accomplishments. He likes to take risks. Perhaps he has already lost his fortune several times and restored it from scratch. That's how I see him," Alice said. "Oh, come on, girl. It's like you've lived a lifetime with this man," said Katie. "To be honest, I'd be interested in talking to this person. But I don't need to," said Alice. "Yeah, you don't need that. Because you already have one. Carlos is his name." Katie laughed again. That was the end of their conversation as Alice had already reached home. A couple days after the party, Alice tried to make conversation with Carlos again. He avoided any conversation out of habit. At that moment, Carlos' cell phone rang. As soon as he picked up the phone, a woman's high-pitched tantrum could be clearly heard. Alice was sitting at the table opposite, and in some places she could even hear the conversations in the phone. "Is this why I gave birth to my son and single-handedly put him on his feet? Do you remember how I had to work for 5 years to pay for your university studies? What did you end up doing? If I'd known what an ungrateful son would grow up to be, I wouldn't have suffered so much and lived happily ever after. You can't expect any attention to your mother, no help and support. Mom, don't start early in the morning. Everything's going to be all right," Carlos mumbled. "Of course you'll be fine. What about Mom? Mother's eating crumbs for bread. Where else can she be better off? You're spending all your money on that little hussy with the crown on her head. When you have time to think about your mother. Come on, Mom, why are you like this?" He looked like he had turned into a delinquent schoolboy and kept muttering the tray. His mother did not listen to him and hung up the phone. Alice at first was shocked by such treatment of her mother-in-law with her son, but gradually she got used to it. Then she realized that talking in such tones is the style of communication between mother and son. Alice had never seen her mother-in-law communicating with Carlos as an adult and established man, periodically reprimanding her adult son on any number. "But many of you have been working here for more than 1 or even 2 years. You department heads started here from scratch and have grown to this level over the years. I care about your fate as experienced specialists. Therefore, I entrust the solution of the current problem to you. Each of you will offer your own variant of the solution, but the practical realization of this solution will also be entirely on you. Whoever is able to lead the bank out of this situation, I will appoint in my place, and I myself will take a well-deserved rest, said John. The ambitious branch managers found the offer tempting. Each of them secretly dreamed of taking the highest position in the bank possible. Hearing the announcement from their boss about the prospect of becoming the head of one of the leading banks in the region, everyone in the room became visibly excited. Carlos thought that this was his finest hour, that he had to show himself in the best possible light in this situation and finally become what he was in his heart, a big boss. After this meeting, a whole new life has begun in the bank. The race for power was declared open, and now the strongest must win. Carlos realized that this was his brilliant chance to finally make a name for himself. Carlos once again didn't come home. Alice stayed up all night waiting for him. In the morning, gathering all her strength into a fist, she packed her daughter for school, then began to get ready for work. That's when Carlos called. Alice, hi. Now please don't start right away. Just listen to me and do as I ask you. In our bedroom in my safe, I have a red paper folder with documents. Take it and drop it off at my office, please. It won't be hard for you to do it on the way, okay? Okay, I will, replied Alice to her beloved husband. Strange, her husband used to keep Alice away from his safe. Now he calmly asked her to open it and even poured through the contents. Alice had never seen what Carlos so reverently, at times even nervously guarding. Indeed, the safe revealed many interesting things. First, Alice's gaze fell on a stack of photo albums. They don't keep those nowadays. Apparently, Carlos hadn't found a suitable place for them in the apartment, so he put them in the far corner of the safe. She opened the photo albums and looked at the pictures. Here Carlos is a schoolboy. In another picture, he receives his high school diploma. Here he is surrounded by his classmates. Here he is the only guy among his classmates. Carlos surrounds himself everywhere with a lot of women, and only in such an environment he can feel happy. Alice had guessed that. Today she was convinced of it once again. In the far corner of the safe, she found another folder tied with a string. Alice was genuinely curious. She realized that it was a waste of time to go through her husband's personal belongings. But she knew she wouldn't use anything against him. If something from his past became known, she was certainly not the kind of woman who would reproach him later for it. On the mysterious folder, she saw a small logo, the logo of a laboratory where, among other things, DNA tests were performed. Alice carefully unfolded the folder. Not many papers inside. The most important one was on top. It stated that Carlos and Jessica's genetic similarity was 0%. This meant that Alice's mother-in-law was not her husband's birth mother. This was news to Alice. She didn't hang on to her shock, quickly found the folder she needed, closed the safe door, and headed towards Carlos' office. He turned out to be out of place. Carlos is at the chief's office. They have an urgent meeting. Wait for him here. Julian, the secretary said. Alice sat down in the office foyer and eyed Juliana curiously. She's the boss's new mistress. She's also the one who got the booty from Ariana at the corporate party. Alice was curious if there was any hair left on Juliana's head from that fight, or if the boss's furious wife had pulled it out clean. But Julian was surprisingly calm and poised. Carlos still hadn't left the boss's office. Alice, though in a hurry to get to work, decided to wait for him. She pulled out her cell phone and immersed herself in reading. Every minute someone from the bank came to the foyer, asking if they could come to the boss. When they found out that he was busy, they went back. After a while, Alice's attention was drawn to a familiar loud voice. You haven't been fired yet? Ariana was standing in front of Julian's desk. No, why would I be fired? Julian seemed startled by Ariana's unexpected visit and couldn't hide her consternation. Her eyes rounded, she quickly got up from her seat and looked ingratiatingly at her boss's wife. That's because I gave the okay to keep you on the fetch and serve. You'll know who your benefactor is, understand? Ariana said the last words with a low hiss. Juliana nodded her head silently. And if you'll be a grateful girl and be my friend, you'll have many more new pleasant surprises waiting for you. What do you think of that? Ariana doesn't seem to like wasting words and time. She stated her position right away. What do I have to do? Julian asked with a trembling voice. Don't you want to ask me how you managed to escape my wrath? Ariana asked. Juliana flapped her long eyelashes and didn't know what to answer. Everyone should know that my eyes and ears are everywhere here. Even the walls of this building serve me. Well, my walls whisper to me that you're not the one sending my husband pictures of you in your underwear. It's someone else in this office. I think her name is Wanda. Find me that skank or show me where she lives, Ariana hissed. Wanda is our marketing girl. I'll get her right away, Julian said and started dialing a number. Alice finished reading. A new episode of the drama called Jealous Woman was unfolding before her eyes. She realized what a mistake Julian was making by inviting Wanda here now. But she liked it better this way. There would be something to watch while Carlos was free. Ariana looked toward Alice and seemed to remember her. Greetings. Alice, if memory serves. Karlowski's wife. How are you? How's the daughter? Ariana smiled. Hello, I'm fine, thank you. I hope you are well, said Alice and regretted that she could not hide her amusement at the quirks of this woman. Wanda appeared. She was a young girl with long dark hair and big eyes. Wanda, there's someone here to see you, Julian said and nodded toward Ariana. Is that what you are, Wanda? So tell us, teach us how to send pictures of yourself in your underwear to the boss's phone in the middle of a company party. Ariana looked at the young girl with a glare. You? What are you talking about? I don't understand you. Now Wanda rounded her eyes and trembled in front of the boss's wife. Ariana pulled out her iPhone, made a couple of clicks on the screen and turned the screen directly to Wanda's eyes. I mean this. Is that a picture of you? Alice managed to see the photo from a distance. Indeed, there was a girl with long hair and lingerie in the photo, but no head visible. It's not me, I swear to you. What makes you think it's me? I have a boyfriend and we're serious. I didn't send those pictures to anyone. Wanda was now starting to get angry. Ariana silently walked over to Wanda, grabbed her by the hair and dragged her over to Julian's desk. Listen to me, both of you. I'll be sure to find out who that brave little twerp is, and then she'll definitely be in trouble. And you probably know more than you're telling me right now. So tell this heroine to pray. If she turns out to be one of you, praying won't help. I warned you, Ariana said and let go of Wanda's hair. Both girls looked at the floor in silence. Ariana shook her hands defiantly, sprayed antiseptic on them and looked toward Alice. You will please forgive me for disturbing you. I have to deal with them in this way, otherwise it's impossible. Good day to you, Alice. Ariana headed towards the elevator. Wanda and Juliana stood like stumbling blocks until she got into the elevator and went out. Yes, Carlos, I'm listening. Hello, darling. I missed you. The day seemed like an eternity. I need to see you and hold you in my arms. Where are you now? Carlos asked. I'm sorry, Dan, you're not in my plans today. I need to be alone. I'll see you tomorrow or some other day, Olivia said, trying to get her insistent friend off her back as quickly as possible. What's wrong? Did I do something to offend you? Or did someone else? Carlos continued to insist. No, it's okay. It's okay to be alone sometimes, especially for someone as creative as me. Please be understanding, Olivia said. But Carlos was deaf to her pleas. He was used to hearing only his own desires. No matter how hard Olivia tried to explain the simple truth that she just needed to spend the evening alone, Carlos continued to give her a real interrogation. He was really quite jealous of Olivia. She's talented, bright, beautiful. She's growing in popularity. She's getting recognized on the street. The press is publishing various rumors about her personality. Carlos clearly wasn't prepared for the peculiarities of his girlfriend's public life. Olivia knew it too. When Olivia realized that talking to Carlos was useless, she simply hung up and turned off her cell phone. A couple hours later, she received a call from the hotel front desk informing her that her personal assistant was tearing into Olivia's room. Olivia was surprised, since she didn't have any personal assistants. But she guessed who it was. Carlos was standing on the doorstep with a small bouquet of fresh flowers. Carlos, you're incorrigible, Olivia said. That's what a real man should be, resourceful and persistent. Don't ask me how I found you. My heart followed in your footsteps, Carlos continued like a mourning nightingale. Olivia wasn't really in the mood to spend the evening with Carlos. She wanted to shoo him away, but he kept insisting that he wanted to stay with her. The more Olivia waved him away, the more insistent he became. I think I know what it is that you can't tell me outright and have been tormenting me for a long time. Carlos pretended as if he discovered something very important. Yes, I realize it's time for us to take our relationship to the next level, but I'm thinking about how to propose to you properly. It should be very romantic and memorable. You should remember it for the rest of your life, Carlos said. What? Carlos, are you even normal? You have a family, you have a wife and a daughter. What kind of proposal are you talking about? Olivia was seriously outraged. I will get a divorce. I'm basically ready to take that step. I think Alice is also ready for it. And with my daughter, I will see her from time to time. I will periodically throw her money, Carlos said. Olivia realized that this crazy guy Carlos actually had far-reaching plans for her. She realized that it was useless to argue with him now that marriage was not in her plans. Carlos has been following Olivia around like a shadow for so many years now, not missing a single night where she's performing, that it really wouldn't be hard for him to get a divorce. Then Olivia decided to come at it from a different angle. Carlos, it's not even about that. Since we're having this conversation, I'm gonna be honest with you. I have really big plans for my future. I'm just realizing a small part of it right now. By the time I get to the halfway point, the whole country will know me. I'll have every man in the country at my feet. You know what you're really like, don't you? Anyone with enough money and power will want my attention. How will you handle it? Let's be honest, you're just a middle manager at a typical bank. How can you fight recognized alpha males and defend your legal right to me? Olivia glared at Carlos. Olivia hoped that talking in this format would hurt Carlos, and he would start to distance himself from her. She could rudely push him away because he'd really done a lot for her. He was the one who convinced the same John to sponsor the filming of her music videos and her performances. A rude rejection would have been ugly on her part, but Olivia wasn't going to build a long-term relationship with Carlos. Carlos had taken today's conversation in his stride. The next day, driving up to the bank office, Carlos thought that Olivia would be delighted if he could fix the bank's current situation and take over the board. He took it as a sign of destiny. Carlos headed straight for John's office. He informed his boss that he had some ideas on how to deal with the current issues of the bank. He asked for copies of some documents, took them, and informed him that he was leaving for the day to deal with these issues. After leaving the bank office, Carlos went to one of the best attorneys in town. After spending about 3 hours with the attorney and getting a detailed consultation, he headed to the top accounting firm in town. He went on to visit several other specialists who are considered the best in their field. By evening, Carlos was sure that he would soon have the top chair in the bank. Indeed, the best specialists in their field began to protect the bank's interests. TV, newspapers, and bloggers were involved for efficiency. The court case received wide publicity. People believed that some group of foreign fraudsters decided to bankrupt the domestic bank and take it into their own hands. Under such pressure from public opinion, the judges had to think twice before deciding on the fate of the bank and then only make a decision. It cost Carlos a lot of money. He went into debt, and even Alice helped him with her savings. In the end, Carlos was close to winning. Elizabeth's birthday was approaching. This year she would be turning 9 years old. Elizabeth remembers all of her recent birthdays. She remembers them because she never had her daddy present. She is old enough now to protest her father's absence. Alice had long thought about how to spend this birthday so that Elizabeth wouldn't be sobbing again the next day. There was no hope for Carlos, of course. He would still spend the day at Olivia's concert somewhere. Alice decided this year to invite Elizabeth's favorite grandmother, Jessica. Her grandmother, like Carlos, had never had much love and affection for Elizabeth, but once a year sitting in a family circle as close friends was a manageable task. So thought Alice. On Elizabeth's birthday, Alice set the table and waited for the guests. Everyone came except Carlos and her grandmother. Elizabeth spent the whole evening asking why Daddy wasn't here and when Grandma would arrive. Alice tried to calm her down by making up different excuses for them. The next day, Alice left Elizabeth at school and went to her mother-in-law's house. Pensioner Jessica spent almost all her time in her apartment. Seeing Alice on her doorstep, she was not particularly happy. But Alice knew how to bribe her mother-in-law. She took 2 large bags of delicacies, fruits, and sweets. "Hello, Jessica. May I come in?" "Oh, it's you." "Well, come in," Jessica said in an indifferent voice. "I couldn't go to Elizabeth's birthday party because I was sick. I'm still sick. My blood pressure is high, my head hurts. My legs are always aching. It's hard to walk," Jessica began to complain. Elizabeth was very upset. "I told you to send a cab to pick you up, or I could drive myself to pick you up. If you're sick, let's go to the doctor. I'll drive you myself. I'll accompany you everywhere. We'll visit the best doctors, get a prescription. I'll buy you all the necessary medicines," said Alice. "No, thank you, no need. The territorial doctor from the polyclinic comes to me. It is enough for me," said the dissatisfied mother-in-law. "Jessica, please tell me that you don't like to come to us. Is it only because of your illness, or is there another reason?" Alice asked. Jessica did not expect such a trick question. "Don't you believe me? And why should I like to come to you? It is you who should go to me. When you get old, you'll understand what it is to go out or stay at home. I personally want to stay at home. That's out of the question." Alice tried for a long time to turn her mother-in-law to a friendly tone of conversation, but she was not very good at it. "I didn't know much about Carlos' childhood. Please tell me about his birth, about his childhood. I'm really interested in all this." Alice finally decided to turn the conversation in the right direction. "What's there to tell? He was born and grew up like all children, but he was very naughty. His father tried to re-educate him many times, but he did not succeed," Jessica said. "And in his disobedience, in whom he was?" Alice asked. "I don't know either. My father was a quiet man, and I wasn't rebellious, only he was the only one. When he was a teenager, he tried to run away from home, and we had to chase after him. I wonder why Carlos doesn't even look like you." Alice finally threw the thread of conversation in the right direction and watched the reaction of her mother-in-law. "It's there too. But I never paid attention to it." Mother-in-law tried to divert the topic of conversation. "Have you always had such a tense relationship with your son?" Alice asked her right in the forehead. "They are not tense. I am a mother. I have the right to instruct him on the right path. I don't have to fawn over him. What makes you think our relationship is strained?" Jessica asked threateningly. "Carlos is an adult. Despite his lack of support, he has achieved a lot on his own. He'll continue to do so. But believe me, it's very important for him to be recognized by you. You're his mother, so you're the most important woman in his life. Your opinion means a lot to him," Alice said. "What do I have to confess to him? I raised him, clothed him, helped him get a higher education. What kind of confession?" Jessica got angry and began to resent him. "The thing is, Jessica, Carlos has known for a long time that you're not his birth mother. He took a DNA test and the results showed that your resemblance to him is 0%. Why are you keeping this from Carlos? Didn't your attitude push him to do it? Why don't you just tell him and talk to him like adults?" Alice said. Jessica dropped the teaspoon she had just used to stir the sugar in her tea. This news was a surprise to her. She had thought this secret would go to the grave with her. But how come now Carlos knew about it? "What the hell are you talking about?" Jessica couldn't hide the tremor in her voice. "If you want, I can show you a copy of that certificate," Alice said. "What's all this digging for? His own parents aren't alive anyway. Why traumatize him now with this revelation?" Jessica was now beginning to slowly give up her resistance. "If you don't want to tell Carlos about this, then let it remain a secret. But the point is, you need to build a relationship with him. Carlos is trying to pretend that everything's fine, but in reality, it's his strained relationship with you that's keeping him from being okay. He can't feel at ease in any setting, in any company. He doesn't feel happy even inside his family with me and Elizabeth. He chases after different women. He thinks that one of them will make him happy, but it's a delusion. He can only find comfort in a warm relationship with you. My marital happiness depends on that too. That's why I decided to talk to you about it," Alice said. "If he's chasing other women, look for reasons in yourself. You nag him all the time too, don't you? He gives everything he earns to you. You roll around like a cheese in butter, but still he feels uncomfortable with you. I love him like a mother and he loves me, Jessica said. No, he doesn't. In our whole life together, I've never laid claim to his money. I make a good living myself. Let it be known that the regular grocery deliveries to your house are also done by me. But I'm not talking about money. I was just trying to get you to get along with him. Then Carlos would eventually change. You have to understand me as a woman, Alice said. The grocery delivery was another revelation to Jessica. She didn't want to be honest about the fact that she really did have some hard feelings about Carlos, but she couldn't understand them herself. Now her sister-in-law claims it's all because she's hiding the truth from Carlos. Jessica is very afraid that if Carlos finds out the truth, he might turn away from her. Then she'll be really hurt too. But since he's already taken a DNA test and has never bought everything she's gotten on a regular basis over the years, maybe Carlos feels something too. Alice realized this topic was too heavy for one conversation. She promised her mother-in-law that they would revisit the topic again. She urged her mother-in-law to try to be honest and trust Alice. Lastly, she reminded her that the two women, she and Jessica, loved the same man. They both wish him well. Their views could not in principle diverge. All that remained was for them to be honest with each other about it. After a couple of months of hard work and endless negotiations with different people, the fate of the bank is almost decided. The court ruled in favor of the bank, but there was still some time during which the opponent company could appeal this decision. So everyone waited with bated breath for the appeal period to end. The company that sued the bank repeatedly signaled that it would not agree with the court's decision. But as a result of Carlos' timely negotiations with the right people, they did not appeal the court's decision. In the end, the bank lost some money, but remained viable. The fact that some middle manager Carlos was able to do so much more than a few deputy bosses and other management people displeased John's inner circle. They clearly realized that they had lost the race for power to this Carlos. This was well known to John as well. At a regular meeting, John addressed his subordinates. Thanks to your collective efforts, we have managed to get out of a very difficult crisis situation. As I promised, it's time to determine the winner and hand over the reins of the bank to him. The managers looked at each other. Only Carlos couldn't understand why his boss was devaluing his merit and now saying that it was a team effort. After all, none of his coworkers had any idea how to get out of this situation until 3 months ago. And now all of a sudden they were complicit in Carlos' victory. He barely concealed his outrage. He decided to talk about it alone with his boss. And John continued his presentation. I think Max has good potential as a manager, especially since he has been with us for over 10 years and has proven himself. Also, I would not want to diminish the merits of our CFO, Mickey Andreevich. He has enough experience to continue our business with dignity. Carlos was now genuinely indignant and only silently rubbed his branded pen. In fact, neither Max nor this Mickey had lifted a finger to keep the bank open and viable. On the contrary, as soon as John had reported problems 3 months ago, each of them had been quietly interviewing competitors and preparing themselves to leave their jobs with minimal loss. The meeting ended and everyone went to their offices. When John returned to his office, Carlos was there waiting for him. John, do you really think that Max and Mickey did anything to save our business? Carlos asked. Why don't you think so? John sounded like he was mocking Carlos. I just don't understand the logic of what you're saying. Carlos looked questioningly at his boss. If you want to be a good leader, you're going to have to learn to act illogically too. Remember, without other people, no one gets anywhere in this life. Your success depends on your ability to influence other people and make them question the logic of your actions. John continued to speak in riddles. Carlos didn't quite get the gist of the conversation. He had expected that at today's meeting the boss would announce his decision to appoint Carlos as a supervisor and that he himself would take a well-deserved vacation. He didn't doubt it at all. That's why he went into debt to pay for expensive consultations of the best specialists. And now it turns out that the best candidate for the top job is Max or Mickey. John, you probably don't know that Max and Mickey have been walking around your competitors' offices for a long time and they're looking for high positions. They're only looking out for their own interests. They don't care who they serve and whose interests they protect. They just want to get their usual high salary and that's it. That's all they need, Carlos said. And you, Carlos, what do you want out of life? Don't you have a sacred idea for which you would do anything? John asked. We'd all know you're hopelessly in love with that singer Olivia. You'd do anything for her too, would you? Consider that other people can have their own Olivias too. And it's not always a singer, and it's not always a person. Some people have a job, some people have regular money, so I don't see the difference between you, Max, and Mickey. You're a fool, Carlos, and your Alice really is a rare pearl. In fact, your appointment as head of the department has already been finalized. I can't wait to put it in your hands as soon as possible and get some rest. But let's talk man to man. I have a small favor to ask of you, and I understand that this favor is realizable, John said. Carlos can't understand why the usually straightforward and categorical boss is now so shy, as if he were a student in an exam. He decided to let the boss talk things out gradually, since the request was so atypical. Could you talk to Alice so that she could give me some time? John finally suggested. What do you mean? Literally, Carlos. I'm a man and she's an attractive woman. Besides, you don't want to protect her. You've got your own woman to love. So let's be honest. I like your Alice. I noticed her when I first saw her at our corporate event. John, I understand you as a man, but why do I have to be her husband in this? You could go to her directly or ask someone neutral. It would look ridiculous on my part, Carlos said. It's up to you, Carlos. I don't want to go through the hassle of looking for a third party. And I'm not going to look for a third person to approach your Alice. I'm coming to you because it's the shortest way. Moreover, I am favorably disposed to you before I sign the decree appointing you in your place. John once again emphasized that Carlos' career advancement was at stake. Carlos thought for a while and decided that for the sake of the prospect that was literally shining in front of him, it was worth it to take the last step. All the more reason to put him and Alice out of their misery. If Alice agrees to meet with John, Carlos will not have difficulties with the divorce. And after the divorce, he's already free for his Olivia. Besides, he will appear before her no longer as a middle manager, but as a bank director. That's a worthy candidate by Olivia's standards, a true alpha male. After weighing the pros and cons, Carlos decided to go home right after work for the first time in years. He didn't find Alice at home. Elizabeth was sitting alone. When Carlos asked his daughter, she said that her mom was studying in the evenings and had been for a long time. It turned out that Alice had been getting some kind of additional education in the evenings for 2 years. Carlos only found out about it today. He decided to take care of the appropriate setting and prepared dinner with his daughter. He set the table and lit candles. But after a while, he remembered the gist of the conversation, and the candles seemed to Carlos as if they were mocking Alice. He put them out and immediately removed them from the table. Alice never returned. Elizabeth informed her father that her mother was coming in quite late. It was also revealed that Elizabeth does her own homework and prepares her own things for the morning. Carlos remembers her as tiny, still begging for her hands and afraid to sleep alone. And now, unnoticed, his daughter has grown up, it turns out. Explaining it by the need to get up early tomorrow, Elizabeth did not bother with her father for a long time and went to bed. Alice came home close to midnight. Where do you go so late? Carlos asked. Whom am I hearing this from? Alice tried to echidna laugh. Seriously, the child sits at home alone, does homework alone, and where does our mom go at this time? Carlos continued in his usual tedious tone. Finally we realize we have a child. We have a family. Carlos, what's wrong with you? What's wrong? I'm worried about you coming home so early. Is it really something serious? Alice asked. Don't be sarcastic. I'm in the mood for a serious conversation in a positive way. Isn't that what you want? Carlos, what do you want? I know we haven't had a serious conversation in a long time. You're still not gonna tell me where you've been. Elizabeth told me you've been studying somewhere. Is that such a big secret? Carlos said. It's no secret. I'm getting a second degree, a liberal arts degree. That's all. I made dinner. Sit down. I'll take care of you tonight, Carlos said. After Alice sat down at the table, Carlos put a piece of fish with vegetables of his own making in her plate, poured hot tea with herbs, and looked after Alice in every possible way. There's actually an occasion, a good occasion. Carlos began ranting. I'm being promoted. John is going on vacation. I'm a potential candidate to take his place. Wow, congratulations. Why is this Jonah guy giving up his seat? Alice asked. He's tired, and he hasn't been feeling well for a long time. He has been saying for a long time that he wants to finally take a rest and put the board in the hands of someone he trusts. Recently, the bank almost went bankrupt. Then he gave us the task of winning the case in court. He promised that whoever could do it would become CEO. I did it. I'm really happy for you, Alice said, standing up from the table and kissing Carlos on the cheeks. Carlos was a little embarrassed, as if he was being kissed by a complete stranger. Did Jessica know yet? I think she'll be very happy, said Alice. I don't think there's any point in telling her yet. First of all, I haven't been officially appointed yet. Secondly, my mom never knew how to be happy about my successes, said Carlos. You're right about Mom, said Alice, and thought about it. She tried to understand how Carlos managed to hide the truth that his mother was not really his mother. It must be hard to play the native son when his mother had already proven by her attitude that she wasn't, and the DNA test just proved it. Alice, let's be honest. I know you're a wise woman. You'll be able to understand and help me. Trust me, it's best for both of us, Carlos said. Alyssa waited for Carlos to finally talk about divorce. She had been ready to do so for a long time and had never been able to sit down with Carlos at the same table and talk calmly. Now she was glad for the opportunity. It would be painless, especially for Elizabeth. You remember John, don't you? Carlos asked. Yes, vaguely, but I remember his wife Ariana very well. She was a truly amazing woman. Alice smiled, remembering Ariana's jealousy scenes. John says he really liked you. He told me to tell you that my appointment depends on you giving him your attention, Carlos said and covered his eyes with his hand, waiting for Alice's violent reaction. What did he say? Asked Alice. Carlos was surprised at the calm reaction as well. How can I speak for you? I'm only relaying his words to you. I need to communicate your decision in the next 3 days, and that will be the end of my mission, Carlos said. You mean you don't care? Alice asked. Well, don't start, please. You have a lot of foreigners at work who are looking at you. I do not know which of them you disappear with in the evenings, under the guise of evening training. What do you care if it's one more or one less? Carlos changed his tactics and started to get downright rude. I can't understand how I could love such a man and believe that someday you and I would get along and live happily ever after, Alice said quietly, looking out the window. Don't dramatize everything, please. Is it hard for you to spend just one night with John? Keep in mind that he is still a tidbit here. I had a lot of young girls fight over him, and you, my dear, should be happy to have the attention of such a man. Carlos was raising his voice. No, it's not hard for a woman to spend the night with John, a delivery boy or a cab driver. The only question is whether she wants to, Alice said. Well, that's fine. I'll let him know tomorrow, and don't let me down, please. I'll pay attention to your John after you agree to the divorce. Carlos rejoiced to himself. The question of divorce worried him as much as the question of his appointment to the position of head. But he tried not to show it right now. If you insist, then let's do it your way. I'll give my consent, Carlos said. After a tense conversation, Carlos and Alice separated into rooms. During the night, Alice got up, went to Carlos's phone and transferred one of the contacts to her phone. She had already thought out her next move and was confident of her success. A couple days later, Alice's phone rang. The name John popped up on the screen. Alice pretended that she didn't answer strange numbers and didn't pick up the phone. She couldn't possibly know John's phone number, so she had her first excuse. Apparently, Carlos had let her know right away that Alice was okay with it. The calls from John didn't stop, but Alice continued to ignore them. In the evening, on her way back from school, Alice went to a cafe, ordered a nice glass of wine, and started researching all the social media and other information on the internet about this John. When she finished her wine, she had a rough image of John in her head. Now she was ready for action. Pictures on social media showed where John was practicing. A couple days later, Alice went to the same gym and bought a 6-month membership. Alice had no trouble recognizing John's visiting time as well. He came closer to lunchtime. Well, Alice would have to replace lunch breaks with workouts for a while. The supposedly chance meeting with John didn't take long. He was the first to spot Alice as she left the gym. Alyssa, good afternoon. What a joyful meeting. Do you also work out here? Asked John. Hello. Your face is very familiar to me, but I can't remember where we crossed paths. Alice made a surprised face. We met at our corporate party. I'm Carlos' manager, your husband. It saddens me that you didn't recognize me, John said. If you're done training, let me give you a ride. We can even have coffee on the way. John tried not to miss an opportunity. I'll let you give me a ride, but coffee some other time, said Alice. On the way to the office, John continuously showered Alice with compliments. It is noticeable that he has a suspended tongue, and most likely, he believes that every woman loves ears. When we got to Alice's place of work, John put the question to rest. Alice, our pleasant meeting could have taken place much earlier. I called you several times, but you haven't picked up. It's possible I don't answer strange numbers. And what did you want to say if I suddenly picked up the phone? Asked Alice. John was taken aback by this bluntness. Did Carlos say anything to you? He asked. Carlos tells me so many good things about you. I don't even know which one you mean. Of the most recent, he told me that you trusted him with your position. I must say, we are very grateful for that trust. I will make sure that Carlos does not let you down and works hard, said Alice with a sincere smile. And now, with your permission, I will go. With great regret, I will let you go now, but I will be waiting for you here tonight after work, said John. John came to his office. He had one last piece of paperwork to sign and gradually begin the process of transferring his powers into Carlos' hands. Today, he finally signed the decree appointing Carlos. Afterward, he called a meeting and announced his decision. He was confident that his business was now in safe hands, and in addition, the beautiful Alice was almost in his pocket. He had a positive impression from meeting her. He was looking forward to the second meeting to move as quickly as possible to the realization of his main desire. Near the end of Alice's working day, he was already waiting for her outside the office. Alice got into his car and gave him a certain address. We need to hurry up. They are waiting for us there, Alice added. John was glad that he wouldn't have to search for a free hotel room on his own. He was sure that Alice knew his purpose. When they reached the desired address, Alice thanked him and said goodbye. Thank you for taking care of me twice in one day. I'm about to start class. I have to go, and you have a good evening, Alice said and took off. John was left puzzled, as he was expecting something else. He had hoped that Carlos had explained everything himself and that Alice would take him straight to the hotel room. He wrote off Alice's behavior as feminine coquetry. I like it better this way. I'll wait, he thought, and left. The next day, Alice filed for divorce. Without waiting for the court's decision, she found herself a rented apartment, packed her things, explained everything to Elizabeth, and moved in with her daughter. And to Carlos, she wrote briefly, Elizabeth and I will live in a rented apartment for now. When you find another place to live and vacate our apartment, let me know. Elizabeth has a long commute to school. Carlos was inspired by his new position and had no desire to argue with his ex-wife right now. So he quickly vacated the apartment and did not delay in agreeing to the divorce. Already a week later, Alice was a free woman. After receiving the certificate of dissolution of marriage, she was in no hurry to move back in. She called an interior designer and asked to completely remake the apartment, taking into account the wishes of her daughter. While the repair of the apartment was underway, Alice decided to completely transform herself. She visited a stylist and completely changed her image. If before she looked like an obedient girl, now she became a gorgeous young woman. All this time, John did not stop calling her every day and insisted on meeting. Alice postponed the meeting, referring then to business, then to fatigue. The second time she met with him already in a new image. John, who used to behave with women as a master of life, next to Alice trembled like a young man. The contrast between the old and new image of Alice in such a short time made a strong impression on him. Alice still crossed him as if in between. She didn't give John a chance to talk for long. She was quick to leave his company every time. John was even beginning to doubt Alice's favor a little, but on the other hand, she's transformed so quickly. It's all for my sake. She wants me to like her. He preferred to think that way. John was determined today. He bought a nice branded bracelet, bought flowers and a box of chocolates for Alice. He was a little sad that she still hadn't had coffee with him. After many busy days, at least today, she would let him drive her from work to her evening studies. Alice, I'm really glad we met. I thought I'd do you a favor today. This is for you. John says Alice was about to get out of the car. He held out his present and flowers with such a solemn look, as if he was presenting a presidential order. I can't take this, thank you, Alice said. Why, don't you like the bracelet? Let's go together and exchange it for another. We can go right now. John was surprised by such a surprise. No, it's not the bracelet. It's really beautiful. It's just that I'm not comfortable accepting such expensive gifts, said Alice. So what if it is expensive? You deserve only such a thing. It doesn't oblige you to anything. I want to make you happy from the bottom of my heart. Take it. John almost begged. You want to make me feel good? Then don't make me violate my principles. And don't be offended by the gift, please, Alice said and said goodbye. Further attempts were useless. When she got out of the car, John looked after her and talked to himself. My God, to think I'm persuading the woman to accept such an expensive gift. Don't make her violate her principles. And what words? What's the matter with you, John? Pull yourself together. Get this woman into bed quickly and forget the whole thing. But how? How? This woman makes me think of my youth. She makes me feel like an inexperienced young man. Just think about it. He looked at his reflection in the mirror and saw his wide smile. Enjoying his youthful state, of course, John did not even notice that Alice had discreetly filmed some moments of their meeting on her phone. Alyssa dialed Carlos to thank him for quickly resolving all the pressing issues of their divergence. First, she congratulated him on his appointment. Carlos was clearly very pleased. In parting, she asked, "Didn't you change your secretary? Is it the same Julianne?" "Yes, she already knows the ins and outs. Let her work. I'm not going to fire her," Carlos said. "Could you text me her phone number? When I was in your office, we talked briefly, but we didn't have time to exchange contacts." Carlos didn't specify what Alice wanted from Julianne. He hadn't cared about Alice for a long time. Now he had every reason to demonstrate it legally. He hung up the phone and he even felt bad for taking the time to forward Juliana's phone number. He invited Juliana over to his place and said, "Contact this one at this number and tell her you are Juliana, my secretary. You'll figure it out for yourself there." Julian was accustomed not to ask too many questions, so she immediately dialed Alice. "Hello. Carlos asked me to get in touch with you. I'm listening." "That's great, Julian. The thing is, I'm the sister of Wanda, the marketer. She told me that you are well acquainted with John's wife, Ariana Markovna. The thing is, I saw him with a woman the other day. She asked you and Wanda to give her things like that, didn't she?" "Yes, she did." "You talked to her. If she's interested, I can send her something. Then let me know, okay?" "Okay, I'll tell her." Alice was now waiting for Ariana's call. Not to waste time, she dialed John's number and said that she would like to meet him at the bar tonight for a drink and then go to a hotel room of her choice. John was delighted. He put all his business aside and a couple hours later, he was already waiting for Alice at the entrance. She came out to him in one of her new looks, which he hadn't seen yet. Sitting at the bar, he began to talk about his connections and achievements, which he was used to showing off in any public. He is usually listened to in silence and nodded his head. But this Alice was also behaving in an unexpected way. "We once played golf with friends in one of the castles in Britain. The British have always been known for their vanity. How can simple games be turned into rituals? I realize that this is all left over from the aristocracy of the last century, but this is the 21st century. The world loves mobility and practicality. I don't understand why it's so complicated. Do you agree with that?" Alice interrupted John. "Yes, perhaps there is such a thing." John again fell into the state of a student before the exam. "Alice, why are you still on a first-name basis with me? We've known each other for a long time. You can use you." John tried to soften the situation for himself. "No, I think I'll continue to address you as you, because a polite form of address automatically emphasizes personal boundaries between people. And that means it's easier to maintain respect between people. It's not a small thing, is it?" Alice asked. John wondered. Ariana had been bugging him all his life about his disregard for personal boundaries. He wasn't sure if she respected him. He suddenly discovered that it was Alice's polite treatment that kept him from displaying his usual consumerist behavior toward women. That's why she seems so unattainable. Right now, she's declaring that she wants to stay that way. And he doesn't have a single argument to parry against that. Throughout the evening, as soon as he started talking about his possibilities, Alice kept turning the conversation into a philosophical direction. After a while, Alice declared that she was tired. They agreed to go to a hotel. They arrived at the hotel and settled in the room. Alice ordered some water. When the water arrived, she poured herself and John a drink. Then she said she needed to call her daughter. The conversation with her daughter went on for a long time. John sipped his water out of boredom and watched TV, then decided to lie down in bed and relax. When Alice finished talking to her daughter and returned, John was already snoring on the bed. Alice undressed, lay down next to him and took many spectacular pictures. Then she got dressed, tiptoed out of the room and hailed herself a cab home. It didn't take long to get a call back from Julianne. She called to say that Ariana herself was willing to meet to find out about her husband's next fling. Alyssa asked for her phone number and thanked Julianne for her help. When Alice was just about to contact Ariana Markovna, she received a call from John. "I understand you've been very tired lately. I'm sorry that yesterday your tiredness was stronger than your passion for me," Alice said. "I'm very embarrassed about that. It doesn't usually happen to me." John started to make excuses like a delinquent teenager. Alice interrupted him again. "I've fallen into a kind of ambivalence. I don't know how to get out of this state. As soon as I can get out of it, I will let you know about it." After these words, Alice said goodbye and hung up the phone. Of course, she didn't tell him that she had put sleeping pills in John's water glass. She leisurely settled down on the couch and began her correspondence with Ariana Markovna. After a polite greeting, Alice sent a video of John trying to give Alice an expensive bracelet. She refused to accept the gift. She then sent photos from the hotel room with the caption, "But I still couldn't resist his pressure." Emotional Ariana completely lost control of her emotions from what she saw. On top of that, she was furious that the evidence was being sent to her not by an outsider, but by her new fling Jonah himself. Jonah was exhausted from his missed chance to spend the night at the hotel with Alice. He was also deeply ashamed of her. In the evening, Ariana had given him another jealousy show. Whereas before he had been pestered for actual cheating, this time he heard a torrent of insults for nothing. He hadn't been able to convince Ariana that things hadn't worked out with Alice. Ariana wasn't going to stop at just figuring things out. The anger she had gotten from Alice's insolence was not going away. John, when he realized that he could only escape from this scandal, went to his country house. For several days, he did not call Alice. He kept waiting for her to call and triumphantly report that she had avenged him in this way. But then he remembered that during the months of his courtship, Alice had never called him. Now she certainly wouldn't call. John talked to himself. "Why am I waiting for her to call at all? I need a distraction," thought John, and invited his friends to his country house. All evening while his friends were having fun, John sat frowning. He tried to keep the conversation going, but he wasn't very good at it. He was terribly annoyed that he had literally become a slave to this cell phone and wished with all his soul that Alice herself would call for once. Strangely enough, Ariana didn't bother him one bit. When people do not love each other, it is very difficult to build a relationship on just one woman's desire. Believe me, I've seen as much as you have. The best thing is when people can find the strength to face the truth. In this situation, let John make his own decision. You're a young, very attractive woman. I don't think you deserve to suffer like this. The two women talked for a long time. Eventually, Ariana confessed that she really hadn't loved her husband for a long time and didn't feel loved. She had thought about divorce many times before, but stopped herself each time. Also, Ariana honestly admitted that indeed many men look at her, so Alice made sure that the way out of the situation was found. Now Ariana is basically ready to talk to her husband and let him go. And for herself, she has learned something important. Now she can be honest with herself. The divorce process of Ariana and John passed without scandal. John announced that he was voluntarily transferring some of his assets to Ariana. The final peace in his soul reigned when he saw Ariana happy with her new chosen one. Alice's words about the need to be honest with herself made Ariana think for a long time. She analyzed all the years of her life together with John and was able to honestly admit to herself that she never felt happy. As far as wealth was concerned, she had already satisfied all her desires, and John had provided her with a fortune that would be enough for the rest of her life. John was in a bad temper for some time. At such times, he sought solace in Alice's company. She no longer rejected him so much, but continued to put him in situations where he had to ask himself many questions and spend days searching for answers. After a while, John announced that he wanted to go to live in the Bahamas. Of course, he was going to take Alice and her daughter with him. Before they left, they got married. John kept trying to find out how Alice felt about Carlos continuing to be the bank manager. Maybe he should be replaced by someone else. Alice didn't ignore the question. Carlos is not a stranger to the organization after all. He grew up there professionally and knows the inner workings of the organization. Let him work. By the way, what's going on with the singer? The singer found someone else. Carlos is enjoying his freedom now, having fun with every skirt he meets. I see. Alice smiled with sadness on her face. It had been years. The sea and sunshine of the Bahamas incredibly transformed the couple. Alice gave birth to a son. Elizabeth entered one of the best universities in Europe. Alice and John spent many happy days together. Sometime after the move, Alice managed to convince John to maintain a friendship with Ariana Markovna. Ariana was so engrossed in her new life that she barely found the opportunity to respond to occasional calls and messages from John. Once, when John called Ariana to wish her a happy new year, she even said hello to Alice. This should be the approach to life for mature people, and it's never too late to become mature. It can be a little painful in the beginning, but then it brings great happiness. Ariana won't let us lie about that. That's how Alice commented and was genuinely happy for her. Carlos, I'm sorry, but there are some people there. They say they're from the auditing company, demanding to see you, Carlos' secretary said. Strange, we weren't expecting any auditors. Invite them in, Carlos said. 3 solid-looking men walked into the bank director's office. It turned out that one of them even knew Carlos. We have been commissioned to conduct an audit of your organization, said one of the men. Who is the client? Carlos asked with concern. It's the authorized representative, John. He has every right to do it. We checked the documents before we entered into the contract, so we only have 3 days to go. Carlos was left puzzled, but he had no right to refuse these experts. After John's death from an accident, Carlos allowed that an heir would soon appear and there might be some hassle. On the 3rd day, the auditors finished their inspection and left. Carlos never got to see their report, but it didn't take long to get an answer. A couple of days later, the door of the director's office opened without knocking or warning. Carlos saw Alice in front of him. She greeted Carlos warmly, sat down on a chair, and carefully moved a stack of documents toward Carlos. Carlos, your late boss John and I trusted you like we trusted ourselves. And the audit revealed an obscenely large overspend, Alice said, pulled out a paper, wrote a 7-digit number on it, and placed the paper on top of the stack of documents. I'm ready to hear all your versions of how you're going to pay off that amount, Alice said and looked at Carlos carefully. As expected, the direct heir to John turned out to be Alice. She was now Carlos' de facto supervisor. The unexpected inspection took Carlos by surprise, and he had no time to do anything about it. As an option, I suggest you settle this within the law. But in that case, you'll have to go to jail, Carlos. Alice continued to remain unperturbed. Alice, give me time. I'll be sure to pay off all my debts. How can you do that? I've served this organization faithfully for so many years, and it's unfair to end up in jail, Carlos pleaded. All right, you've convinced me. We won't put you in jail. But you can't stay in this place any longer either. So I suggest you write your own resignation now. Well, my kindness doesn't end there. As an old friend, I can offer you a position as a security guard in this building. True, the income is not comparable, but you will have a chance to learn discipline, said Alice. Carlos had no choice but to write a letter of resignation. Of course, the offer to work as a security guard was a mockery on Alice's part. Carlos decided to give himself time to rest to decide on his future prospects. A few days later, he learned from former employees that Alice had appointed her brother Slava as the head of the bank. Carlos could not find words to comment on all this. What could he say? Alice, the full owner of the organization, as she decides, so she does. Only now Carlos realized that years ago he had vainly thought Alice was an uninteresting, characterless woman because she accepted all the rules of the game Carlos was playing. Now he realized that it was her personal decision. Her loyalty and ability to be honest was not a weakness, but actually turned out to be her strength. The most delicious thing in the world is semolina. Even if it's not buttered, it's almost unsweetened. The menu at the children's hospital wasn't very varied. In the morning, the corridor was filled with the smell of burnt milk, and then the door leading to the stairs slammed, and the dispenser rolled in a cart with plates. Angelica followed the heavyset woman like a rat following the magic Pied Piper. "Didn't your mother bring you a mug again?" the dispenser asked. Angelica only shook his head, not correcting it. Aunt Lucy was not his mother, but his stepmother. But that didn't matter. And about the cup, you can ask the neighbor Grandma Selena if she comes to visit him again. Grandma Selena has felt sorry for the boy since the day she saw his stepmother feeding him dog food. Why? If you salt it, it's quite edible. It's good enough to eat. Angelica stopped by the dispenser as soon as she brought her cart into the recreation called here canteen, and he got his porridge first, and a few pieces of dry white bread and a glass of cocoa. Not all the patients in the children's ward came out for breakfast. No one liked the food. They brought something better from home. And Angelica was at a loss, didn't know what to do. Usually, if he got something tasty, he was used to stretch the pleasure for a long time. Even though it's hard when you're hungry, but still, you eat better if you take a little bit of food on a spoon and savor every bite, every sip. But here the dispenser is sure to start rushing him. She wants to be free and leave as soon as possible. And if you get rid of the porridge quickly, she is sure to shove another portion. She still has some left. Once in a while they give an egg in addition to porridge. It's a real feast. Here it can be eaten by the crumb for a long time. Best of all, in his short life, and he was not yet 10 years old, Angelica knew hunger. The happiest period for him was his early childhood, when his father was still alive. Angelica thought he was the best man in the world. There were still pictures in the album, and one of them still hung on the wall. Stepmother was also proud that she had such a husband. The father, very young, thin, put his foot on the step of his helicopter. The son remembered him a little differently, though those memories were blurred, of course. After all, several years had passed, but still, he imagined his father more heavy, without a smile, always with some hidden sadness in his eyes. He was surprisingly calm around him. Once his father had tossed Angelica into the air, and the boy was not afraid in the slightest. He knew that his father would catch him. And so it was with everything else. Whatever happened in life, the father was always responsible for everything, took the solution to problems on himself. And with him around, the whole family felt like a wall of stone. And Aunt Lucy wasn't like she is now. She seemed to Angelica like a girl with a pigtail tied with a ribbon. Aunt Lucy often laughed and baked pies with potatoes, cabbage, and apples. She boiled borscht in a big pot. The house was clean and smelled of joy. Yes, remembering that time, Angelica was sure that joy has the smell of freshly washed floors, father's tobacco, puff pastry. And joy is also like multicolored pendants on the crystal chandelier, which cast glare on the whole room and dance on the walls. Aunt Lucy's own daughter, Katie, was Angelica's equal at that time, but there were 2 children in the family. And if Angelica sometimes conceded to give her the best cake or a new toy, it was only because she was a girl and he was a future man. And it wouldn't be nice to be greedy. And then the father died. Other kids' mothers lied to their children, saying, "Your daddy was a military pilot and crashed. Maybe there's really no daddy there. It's all just a consolation to the kids." As for Angelica's father, it really was like that. Some malfunction in the helicopter turned out to be a fatal accident. In those days, it seemed to Angelica that the only person close to him was Aunt Lucy. She cried so much, so bitterly for her husband. She must have really loved him. Katie did not grieve at all, though her father spoiled her. He gave her dolls and dresses, put her around his neck, carried her around the room just like Angelica. But Katie didn't even want to go to the funeral. She asked me to take her to a friend's house, which her mother did. Angelica remembered that many people came to say goodbye. The grave was covered with flowers, but the father-dead son did not see the coffin was closed. And that's why in the boy's mind there was a fanciful thought that his father was not dead, but had gone somewhere to the clouds. And sometimes, when an airplane flew overhead, Angelica looked at it for a long time. Maybe it was his father flying. He couldn't just disappear like that. Everyone said that Angelica looked a lot like his father. The women repeated this to Aunt Lucy and added that the boy was left to comfort her. He would grow up to be as kind and decent as his father and would be the master of the house again. And only once did her closest friend ask Aunt Lucy, "Well, what have you decided?" "What do you mean?" the stepmother asked. "Are you going to keep the boy for yourself?" Stepmother sighed and began to think out loud. "Actually, I didn't adopt the boy. Archie wanted him to adopt Katie, and I adopted Angelica. But we never got around to it, so legally, I could put him in an orphanage. But don't talk me into it yet. First of all, Archie knew his job was dangerous, and he made me promise not to leave Angelica behind. And I've seen nothing but good from my husband, so I want to keep my word. Secondly, people will judge. Archie had a lot of friends who would start pointing fingers at me in the street, saying I kicked the boy out of the house. And this apartment is not mine, it's Archie's." Angelica listened, freezing. He could not imagine that Aunt Lucy could give him up somewhere. "Then I'll tell you what," Aunt Lucy smoothed the oilcloth on the table. "Make everything legal. Take Angelica into some kind of foster home. The state will pay money for the boy, and you, as a tutor, will get a salary. You'll get seniority. And if you change your mind, you can always cancel the contract." From that time at first, almost imperceptibly, but gradually more and more clearly began to indicate that Aunt Lucy refers to her own daughter quite differently than to her stepson. Angelica became at home something like a neighbor who lives his own life, but no one cares about him. While her father was alive, Aunt Lucy did not work, but now she had to find a place for herself. With no education behind her, she could only get a job as a letter carrier. Angelica felt responsible for his stepmother after all, for his father loved her. Therefore, the boy often accompanied Aunt Lucy, carried her heavy bag, gave his hand when it was necessary to walk on an icy path. "Do not be afraid. Hold on to me," he said. But the stepmother received pennies at her new job, as she said. To make ends meet, she spent Angelica's pension, which he was entitled to for loss of breadwinner, and the money that the state paid her foster family. Against this background, she was very annoyed by the need to spend a monthly sum on her stepson. They almost missed school too. Aunt Lucy realized only in the middle of August that her stepson was already 7 years old, and it was time to enroll him in an educational institution. She hastily passed the medical examination with Angelica, then brought him things from which grew up the son of a friend. "This is what you'll wear to school, and notebooks, pens and pencils?" he asked quietly. Aunt Lucy sighed so noisily that the neighbors must have heard. Then she took a bill out of her purse. "Here, and try to make it last. I don't have any more." And so it went. Angelica was afraid to mention to the teacher that he couldn't give money for breakfast, for a classmate's birthday, for the needs of the class. "I'll tell him at home," he repeated, eyes downcast when the teacher reminded him that he still hadn't deposited the required amount. Finally, the teacher made an entry in his diary, "Downey, please come to school." The stepmother didn't show up for the talk. She made a scandal over the phone. She said that the food in the school canteen was unpalatable and that all fees were illegal. She didn't have that kind of money, and she would complain to the region. After that, the teacher always looked around Angelica as if he was not her ward, but just a boy who happened to wander into the classroom and sat on the back desk. When Katie went to school a year later, things were very different for her. No, the stepmother did not become richer, but she broke her heart to make sure that the girl did not look worse than others. And of course, her daughter had breakfast and lunch at school. So when Angelica came home, there was often nothing there. Aunt Lucy would only come home in the evening, and that's when she'd start cooking. That was good for Katie. She'd come home fed, and she always had change in her pocket, so she could run to the kiosk and buy a pie or a bun. What was a hungry Angelique to do? He diluted hot water ketchup turned out to be soup, searched around the house. Suddenly somewhere there are a few coins, and he will be able to buy a bag of oatmeal. The boy's poverty was so conspicuous that his classmates subconsciously considered Angelica unfortunate and alienated him. That's why he couldn't go to his friend's house under the pretext of doing homework together. And there, look, his mom would offer to have a snack. Angelica had no buddies. And with dog food, it turned out like this. Back when her father was alive, they got a little dog named Klippa. Katie asked for it. Klippa was getting good canned dog food at the time, and Angelica couldn't read yet. He saw a brightly colored can in the fridge, took it out and used a spoon. "What are you doing?" Aunt Lucy asked. "I'm eating," answered Angelica. "It's okay, but it needs salt." It took the stepmother a lot of effort to keep a cool face, and the next day she decided to amuse her daughter. She put a new jar in front of Angelica, opened it herself, and handed the baby a spoon. "Eat." Then she called Katie, apparently having warned her in advance. The girl was not as restrained as her mother and laughed until tears, and Angelica did not understand why everyone was laughing. Now Klippa got old, and for expensive fodder in the family was no longer enough money. Stepmother bought the cheapest cans. The taste of these wet cubes was still the same, but when Angelica was starving, he ate them too. The main thing was to salt them. In the evening, when Aunt Lucy came, she cooked, of course, and then she would call Angelica into the kitchen, hand him a plate of fried potatoes or macaroni, and wave goodbye. "Go there, eat at your place." Obviously, she wants to stay with Katie, to talk to her, to drink tea. Katie's stepmother often even brings cakes. Then Aunt Lucy cleans up the kitchen, washes the dishes, hides the rest of the food in the fridge. Once Angelica lifted the lid of the frying pan arbitrarily, took a cutlet, stepmother clapped him on the arm. "Grow up, you will have your own pots, and from them you will carry." Angelica was very conscientious in his father. He understood. What does not belong to him cannot take, and he never dared to eat anything without asking. In the morning, Katie often didn't want to eat breakfast. She knew she'd eat at school. Aunt Lucy would cut Angelica a piece of bread, pour a glass of tea, and send her out the door. And the boy was left to breathe in the delicious smells coming from the dining room at recess. One day a friend said to Aunt Lucy, "Doesn't Angelica faint from hunger yet? After all, skin and bones left from the boy." The stepmother brushed it off. "The boy is growing up. If he had bones, he'd have meat." Opposite their apartment lived grandmother Selena, a lonely old woman. It was said that she had a daughter in another city. Angelica had never seen her, but he liked Grandma Selena very much. She didn't have a dog, but she had a favorite cat, Boniface, for her own people, just Bonja. Once Angelica ran into his grandmother in the stairwell. "Here, I do not know who to ask," she saddened. "I need to leave for a week in the regional center in the eye hospital." "What about Bonique?" "Angelica, sweetie, can't you give the cat food and water once a day? And change the litter in his litter box from time to time?" Angelica shrugged his shoulders. "Why not?" "Come with me," Grandma Selena said. "I'll show you everything. You just saved me. I didn't know who to ask. And you're a good boy, responsible." Grandma had a one-bedroom apartment. She still managed to get it when she worked as an engineer at the factory. The apartment was very clean, cozy, and quiet. A gray Boniface came out of the room with a board gate. "Heat me out briefly." "Now, my dear," Grandma Selena opened the refrigerator. "Here, look. I always have bags of food, but Bonnie doesn't like them very much. Here is for him sausage, chicken, fish. Milk is better not to give him. He digested badly. But Bonchka loves cheese. Well, can you manage?" "You're what, dear?" said his grandmother Selena in farewell. "Treat, get well, and do not worry. I have to go somewhere, and I probably won't be seeing you anytime soon. The doctor said you're gonna be here for 2 more weeks, and then we'll figure something out." Angelica didn't really understand what the kind old woman could think of. Subconsciously, he felt that he could not go back to Aunt Lucy and Kathy, and they would not take him. So the only road ahead was to the orphanage. Grandma Selena was on her way to see her daughter. She rarely took trips like this. Before, when she was raising Veronica, she thought she would spend her old age with her daughter. She would not complicate Nika's life, would not interfere in her affairs. She would have her own room, but they could spend evenings together, to drink tea in the kitchen, to talk about everything that happened during the day. All this is so dear to the mother. She will help Veronica. She will clean, wash, cook. Her daughter will always beat chess. Grandma Selena was most of all afraid of the endless terrible nights. Terrible because there was no one around. Several times at night she got sick, had to call an ambulance. Grandmother Selena was afraid that she would not have time to say goodbye to her daughter, so she would go to the other world without meeting her. Yes, she had once hoped to be by Betty's side, but life had decided otherwise. Grandma Selena's train was a terrible old train that should have been decommissioned long ago. The shelves in the parlor car are hard, covered with brown oilcloth. The mattresses are skinny. The bedding is still wet. But worst of all, it was cold and the windows were blowing mercilessly. When the old woman found her place, her neighbor said to her, "Don't undress yet." The conductress promised that after scissoring they would flood the car with coal and it would be warmer. And if you have a bag, put it on your pillow. It's dripping from the window. My pillowcase is already wet. Unfortunately, I found out the hard way. It was already dark outside the window. The conductor offered tea. Granny Selena settled down for the night. A green plastic bag rustled under her head. She knew she was unlikely to sleep that night. She always slept badly on the road, and to distract herself from the coziness of the carriage, she began to remember her life. Selena had grown up in a family of teachers. Her father was the headmaster of the school and disappeared at work from morning to night, and her mother, Angelica, led the lessons of literature. At that time, they had a good 2-room apartment, had everything that was considered a sign of wealth: crystal, carpets, wall. But the little Selena seemed that the house was stifling atmosphere. Over the years, she realized what her mother had created. Father, maybe that's why he preferred to spend time at work, too much at home. Everything was right. Angelica kept the house perfectly clean, and of course, Selena had to help her with the cleaning, which dragged on all day long. There were probably 15 different kinds of cloths, and each had its own purpose: for dust, for windows, for plumbing, for dishes, for chandeliers, and so on. And God forbid you get them mixed up. Several times a year, Angelica washed even the fabric that upholstered the sofa and then deftly nailed it back in place. Just as methodically and punctually, she prepared a 3-day lunch. There were no snacks. The family would gather around the table. The hostess would bring a deep tureen, and she would pour the first course onto plates. There was also a ritual of washing dishes and a place on the shelf for each cup. If Selena had grown up in another family, maybe she would have tried to rebel. But here any of her whims and protests were suppressed from early childhood, and by school age she had already clearly learned that she had no right to her own opinion. The main duty of the girl was to study. She had to bring home only A's, to B's mother treated as if they were unsatisfactory marks. And since Selena also studied at the music school, she had no free time at all. It would not have occurred to her to bring home girlfriends, especially a boy. Although Angelica worked as a teacher, that is, she had to love children. In fact, all girls she considered ill-mannered, and communication with them would not bring Selena anything good in her opinion. As for boys, in high school, Selena began to think that she would never get married at all. Her mother would allow her to agree only if the young man would be from a decent family. Wooing will be all the rules, and bouquet candy period will last several years. Having received a certificate and a gold medal, Selena for the first time in her life rebelled. She did not enter the music school as her mother wanted, and went to the regional center and easily passed to the Polytechnic Institute. She was given a place in the dormitory without any problems. Her roommates sighed, remembering the comfort of home. Selena had the feeling that she broke free. After classes, you can wander the city streets at will, stand near the store windows, buy pies from the tray, take tickets to the movies for the last session. And you come back to the dorm and it's not boring there. Guys from neighboring rooms come to visit, stay up late, sing to the guitar. And to her future technical specialty, Selena treated with respect and interest in the university worked. Excellent teachers were able to instill a love for the subject. In summer, students went to the construction team. Of course, they had to work a lot, but in the evening there was still time and energy to swim in the river, sit by the fire. At this time, Selena had the first romance of her life. Anthony had a funny last name, Stone, but he was the most handsome among the boys, shouldering, and those blue eyes. In the fall, when the students were sent to the potatoes, their relationship became very close. Rachka had a hard time. The endless field, mud, dampness of the barracks where the guys slept. Anthony gave her his gloves, carried heavy buckets of potatoes, gave the girl a break at every opportunity. And in the late fall, Selena realized she was pregnant. She consulted with the girls about what to do. Yeah, that's what she did. She told her roommates before Anthony did. "You can't wait. Stone won't marry you," sighed one of her friends. "He'll graduate and return to his hometown. His parents have already picked out a bride for him there." "Maybe it's better not to tell him anything at all," suggested another. "Go to the hospital, and there's no problem." "You'll be able to pass the winter session," said the third, "and the spring session. Well, we'll help you. We'll take care of your baby. Think about it, Selena. You'll never forgive yourself later." Selena didn't believe it was that bad at first. But when she told Anthony about her pregnancy, he grinned awkwardly, said nothing. But from that day, he started to avoid her. This clearly showed the girl that she had to solve all the problems on her own. Selena couldn't bring herself to go for an abortion. She spent the winter session in the hospital, lying in labor. But she managed to get through her exams, and the teachers felt sorry for her, seeing her so gaunt, exhausted. They didn't pick on her, gave her good marks. In the spring, Selena decided to go home. She hadn't been there for a long time, and she'd hoped that her parents didn't have hearts of stone. She would like to spend the last weeks before the birth in her hometown, go to the hospital there, and then return with the baby to her room, where everything is familiar and familiar. Maybe her grandparents would help her just a little, just until Selena got her diploma. And then she will find a job, will rent a place, but to look after the baby in the most difficult time, when you need to prepare drawings, pass state exams, it is worth a lot. No, Angelica didn't make a scene. She, without delay, on the day of arrival, talked to her daughter. In a calm, cold tone, she put Selena on notice. They are respected in this town. The family had been considered blameless until now. And suddenly a daughter unmarried, with a child out of wedlock, who has ruined her life with her own hands, falls on her head. "Do you realize that you have to take responsibility for your deed?" her mother asked in a strict teacher's tone. Selena nodded. "And you have to pay for the fact that you did not resist the first man you met." Angelica continued, "Well, you will live in cramped conditions. You will study for exams at night, under the crying of children. That's the payback. And if now life will not punish you, you will not make the right conclusions." The very next day, Selena returned to the dormitory. She was welcomed. They gave her a room on the floor where students who had families lived. Many of them also had children. At the end of May, little Veronica was born. Fortunately, the labor went easily, without complications, and Selena was discharged quickly. She really had a very difficult time, but the other young women did not refuse to help. They babysat Betty while Selena ran to counseling, passed state exams, defended her diploma. And then, together with her tiny daughter, Selena went on assignment to a young city, which was just beginning to be built. Therefore, everything here over time became dear to the woman. Before her eyes, houses, hospitals, schools, cinemas were built, stores were opened. At first, the small family lived in the factory dormitory. Selena gave half of her salary to the nanny. And then the factory gave her a one-room apartment. It was a real happiness. Beauty Selena was not beautiful, but the appearance had a pleasant enough, and the character, according to general reviews, she had a golden. But the novel in the life of a woman never happened. Men have tried to make her their mistress, but on such an option Selena never went. If a man initially states to her that the wife for him in the first place, and the connection with her, Selena, will only be a pleasant pastime, why does she need it? Besides, there were several examples of wives who, after learning of their husband's infidelity, went to their mistresses, made ugly scenes, screaming, clawing at their hair, shaming, cursing. Why did Selena need all this? She wanted her daughter to respect her. Selena devoted herself to Veronica, raised her daughter the opposite of the way she was raised when she was a kid. She didn't force her to be an excellent student, allowed her to take her friends home, allowed her to have a cat. For a very long time, mother and daughter were very close. Both were looking forward to summer, when they could go somewhere on vacation. From her factory, Selena received a cottage. She was given vouchers to a pioneer camp for Veronica and to a tourist resort for both of them. If you remember those years, rich mother and daughter, of course, did not live richly, but they did not feel their poverty. If they worked hard, did not spend too much, did not lavish on everything they needed, they had enough. And yet, in the depths of her soul, Selena had a nesting anxiety. She realized that her daughter had no one else but her. All responsibility for Betty lay with her mother. And when the girl graduated from school and then the institute, Selena, as if a heavy weight fell from her shoulders, the main task in her life she fulfilled, put Betty on her feet. Selena's parents by that time were no longer in the world. Her father was the first to die. When Selena arrived at the funeral, she noticed that her mother didn't look so good either. She could hardly walk, and it was clear that things were getting worse, and soon Angelica would not be able to take care of herself. "Maybe you could move in with me?" Selena suggested timidly. "Betty and I will look after you." Her mother showed no gratitude. On the contrary, she resented it. "I don't want to be indebted to anyone. I've already called the nursing home to find out. When the time comes, I'll go there and live there." "Isn't it better there than with your own people?" "Of course. The staff there have to look after the old people. They get paid for it, and you and Betty will wait impatiently for the minute I die to be free from my worries." Selena was hurt to tears, and she did not offer her mother any more help. Moreover, she did not visit Angelica in the nursing home and only came for the funeral. Selena could hear behind her back the whispers the old men kept saying what a bad daughter she was. If they only knew, the woman thought. The apartment Selena's parents never privatized, it went to the state. When Veronica brought her fiancé, Selena realized that mutual sympathy between her and Billy did not arise. She herself had worked honestly all her life, and she believed that you can only achieve something if you don't feel sorry for yourself. Billy, on the other hand, was by nature very lazy. He used every spare minute to relax. Lying on the couch, reading something or watching a program was the best leisure for him. John was born and Veronica had a hard time. It took a lot of energy to take care of the household, to nurse the baby. Selena came to help her daughter. She saw that Veronica was exhausted, getting up at night to the child from the last strength. Billy didn't want to take on any household chores, and his paycheck was so small that he barely had enough for food. Selena tried talking to her daughter first. "You won't get out of poverty with him," she said to Veronica. "On the contrary, you'll get deeper and deeper into it. Well would be a handy man, built a cottage there, or at home would be something to master. So it is not even call him to re-glue the wallpaper, or let him work part-time so that you and your son have everything they need. And he..." "Oh, Mom," Veronica sighed. "Don't you see? It's useless to demand from Billy what he can't give. We'll only get into a fight, and I don't have the energy to fight anymore. You see, it's like it used to be. In the village, there were the sturdy owners and the poor. The former weren't afraid to work, and the latter preferred to work the minimum. Can't your Billy force himself to?" Veronica only shook her head. "All right," her mother continued, "if there was some great love between you two. But there's nothing to talk about with him. He takes the first book he can find by the bedside and reads it until he falls asleep. Reading doesn't develop him. It's like chewing gum. You'll be mentally lonely with him for the rest of your life. You know the term lonely alone together." Billy must have heard some of the conversation, some fragments of it, because he said to his wife bluntly, not bothering to lower his voice, "Your mother has never been able to build a relationship with any man, has lived all century without a husband, and now she wants to destroy your family." That night Selena cried bitterly, and the next day she packed up and left, finding an excuse not to stay with her daughter. She promised herself that she would never again interfere in Veronica's life unless she asked for her help. And Grandma Selena kept her word. She saw her daughter less and less. She'd offered to send her grandson to her on vacation, but he was not interested in spending the summer months at her grandmother's house. Only in connection with relatives' rare phone calls and beautiful cards for the new year. An outlet for grandmother Selena was communication with the family which lived with her on the same landing. A handsome young Archie, a military man, a helicopter pilot, and his young laughing wife Barbara. Selena sometimes thought wistfully that this was the kind of son-in-law she would want. Barbara was lucky. Archie could always be called on if she needed a man's help around the house, and his hands were golden. And when the couple had a baby, and Barbara worriedly asked her neighbor if she was disturbed by the baby's crying, Grandma Selena only smiled. "I envy you," she said. "I didn't get to see my grandchildren." And then Barbara died, an unexpected complication from a simple operation. Archie had aged a few days. Selena, along with other women, helped organize the funeral and the wake, and cried, pitying the orphaned father and son. A few years later, Archie brought a second wife, Lucy, into the house. "Life is life," sighed to herself Grandma Selena. "Well, he's a young man, were he all-century widowhood, and Aleftina may become Angelica's second mother." But it did not happen, and when Archie was 9, when the relationship with the grandmother Selena with this family came to naught, the old woman by that time retired, and the only soul mate for her was a cat Boniface. And then it turned out quite unexpectedly that Angelica had to be rescued. Grandmother Selena could not take the boy to herself at her age. She would not be allowed to do so. But Veronica, the mother, wanted to talk to her daughter. John was all grown up now, and Angelica needed real care. Maybe Betty would take the boy in, open her heart to him. And if not, perhaps she knows a family who could do that. The boy's golden, you can't put him in an orphanage. It was late at night when Grandma Selena finally dozed off. She knew that she would not give up what she had done, and she would fight for the boy as long as she had the strength. And she was sure that God would help her do it. Veronica didn't even realize the world had collapsed in one day or what. She bought a trip to New York, the cheapest one, a bus tour. Basically, it was better not to go, but to stay home. There was a new virus sweeping the world. Big city, big risk. At home, if anything, you can call a doctor you know. Not just a familiar doctor, almost a family doctor. How many times he'd gotten their whole family out? Jack was a fourth-generation doctor, lived by the old ideals. John once, reading James Herriot's memoirs, said, "Mom, in Yorkshire, you call the vet at night. He packs up and goes. Here, the only thing you can call at night is an ambulance and Jack. And if he can't help, no one can." Almost all the space of the 9-bedroom was occupied by bunk beds. But in the corner there was the biggest fireplace Veronica had ever seen. Of course, it had never been stoked in the last few decades, but it was so easy to imagine the fire. The fireplace was decorated with molded angels. Veronica, without lighting the aurora, went to the bed by the window and sat for a long time, looking at the lights dancing in the river water and almost feeling the ghostly heat of the fireplace with her back. It felt like she was a little lost in the centuries, and whether she could find her way back to the present remained to be seen. It was time for a snack. Veronica hadn't eaten anything since yesterday. The receptionist Casey said there was a cooler, tea, coffee, cookies in the lounge. In principle, she could have been satisfied with that. But Veronica wanted to wander around the city, to feel its streets under her feet. At least for a little while, but to feel like she belonged here. The strength came from somewhere. She decided to walk to the Gostiny Dvor. Her mother used to take her there, and in the cafe she bought a dessert, which Veronica remembered forever because she had never tasted anything like it before. Something between cream and jelly, chocolate and color. It was a chance to go back to her childhood and eat such a dessert for the second time in her life. Veronica walked and was surprised to see no snow or ice on Nevsky. She thought that the janitors put their heads back, breathed on the snowflakes, and they melted without reaching the ground. There were souvenirs for sale in the underpass. Should I bring something home or not? The people at home don't care that she's gone. She wanted to bring her husband something anecdotal, something aimed at foreigners. Billy seemed so foreign to her now. Take him this tricolor hat with white, blue, and red stripes, a toy balalaika, and a bottle of vodka. Although he won't even notice the hint. He'll just drink the vodka. From one door of the Gostiny Dvor smelled the subway. Veronica entered the other, the store itself. She went up to the second floor and looked around in which direction to go. She couldn't remember at all. She turned right and walked for a long time, going around the huge building, but she found the cafe. Here they still served desserts, luxurious for Veronica, because in her hometown there were no such things. However, she was not a big walker in cafes and restaurants, and maybe she just didn't know. Veronica took a puffy pink tower on a porcelain plate and cocoa. She sat down at a table. The cafe was almost empty. Besides Veronica, there was another man sitting nearby. He slowly sipped his coffee from a tiny cup. His eyes were on his phone. Veronica looked at him without hurrying, so she wasn't afraid to meet his eyes. She stared and stared, not believing. Then she got up and sat down at his table. "Mickey," she said, "recognize him?" They'd been at the institute together. Only Veronica was a proper. Every time she left here in the dark, Veronica stayed in the reading room until the library closed. She saw the lights on the second floor in the windows of the boarding school bedrooms, and on the third floor, the girls were working at the loom. Veronica imagined that they did not leave the theater like princesses from an enchanted castle. Bedrooms, rehearsal room, and stage. That was their whole world. The library, too, was divided into three parts: the reading room, the book depository, and the rare book department. In the reading room, where students worked most of the time, a very beautiful girl gave out books. She resembled a mulatto with smooth dark skin, huge black eyes, and curly hair. When Veronica read a novel by George Amado, she thought that this is what Teresa Batista, tired of fighting, should look like. To the rare book department, there was a separate passage under the roof. Along the half-dark staircase was the kind of junk one sees in old houses: a decayed piano, a decrepit knitted shawl, already stinking of dust, a carved sideboard of God knows what century. It seemed that upstairs you would be met by the attic, where there would be even more of this junk. But no, the rare book department was two adjacent rooms, which would have been bright if it were not for the pigeons that clung to the windowsills. If you opened the windows, you could hear only the rustle of their wings all day long, starting at dawn. But that time Veronica came here late. It was December, it was getting dusk, it was -30 outside, and the windows were decorated with shining frost patterns. Mickey was here too. They both had to wait for an old librarian in a downy shawl draped over her shoulder to find the books they had ordered in the adjoining room. They stood at the window, scratching patterns on the frosty glass for nothing to do. Veronica, with her manicure, was better at it. The only thing that surprised her was that the frost wasn't cold. It was like tooth powder, but the glass was already icy. "For your diploma?" she asked Mickey, referring to the books he'd come for. She spoke simply to keep quiet. Veronica had to remember to stay away from Mickey. "Yes," he said simply and smiled at her as if they had been friends for 1,000 years and Veronica was his soulmate. "I came to the history department for the Middle Ages, for romance, and they gave me the subject alluvial property of peasants in some century." Middle Ages was read by the deputy dean, a heavy elderly woman who could not even mentally be identified with the romantic setting. "What were you hoping for?" Veronica asked. "That she would ask you to write how the hooves of the horses on which the knights rode carved sparks from the sidewalks of Paris." She wanted to reason with him, to tell him that one should never make one's love public. She was shocked by Son of the Dead Schmiller, the Crimea in the Civil War, his tragedy, compared to which Shakespeare seemed a kind fairy tale. Veronica has always been drawn to tragedies against even her will. They burned her heart. Everything else seemed petty, insignificant. What a time, what heroes. But she had never said a word about it to her supervisor, and now she was waiting for a file of old newspapers to be brought to her. She got the topic, the Socialist Menshevik Press of 1917. "You can still write a thesis without love," Mickey said. "You just have to spend a piece of your life on it. It's just a job. Writing a degree is like bringing a sack of potatoes from the market." "What can't you write without love?" Veronica squinted, though the light in the room was dimmed by a single bulb, naked, hanging on a long cord. "A book," Mickey said. "Are you writing a book now? You see the grief I'm going through. There were 3 general notebooks. I was finishing the last one." Veronica knew why he wrote in notebooks. Not on a tablet, not on a laptop. He writes on a piece of paper. The professors didn't pester in this case. They thought the student was writing down what they were saying. Just an outline, just like the rest of us. After the bell rang, Mickey would look up, as if he was out of his own world. "What lecture did we have?" he'd ask. And now his unfinished novel's been nicked. Most likely dorm girls, groupies. They don't care if it's a tie, a cigarette butt, a piece of underwear, or a book, as long as it's from their idol. "But I can't," Mickey said, almost desperately. Even if they give it back, I can't go on. Somebody's been reading it. It's like they got their dirty feet in it. What's the point, huh? Who cares about it as much as I do?" He looked at Veronica with such a helpless, childish look that only at that moment she realized why everyone needed him. He's always with an open mind. It's like sitting by the stove and warming your hands, no matter how long the fire lasts. But that blissful moment when someone else's flame is near. Mickey didn't look well now. Tall, he seemed shorter. Younger still, older. "Betty," he said. "Oh my God, Betty." He put the phone away and took her hands. Didn't hesitate for a second. His hands were warm, hers were cold. "Do you live here?" he asked. "How long have you lived here? How can it be that we've never met?" Veronica closed her eyes. She wanted to say that one could live on the same street or even in the same house and never meet. But the words fell away, and she didn't understand why she suddenly lost the ground beneath her feet. She hadn't thought of Mickey before, not in years. But it turned out she needed him so badly she was dizzy. "Do you love your wife?" "She's sick. I can't leave her." He tried more than once to leave, to live alone again. He fell in love with a pretty girl, hoped for a paradise for two, for Adam and Eve, but it was a trap. Eve was like the serpent herself. Her mother-in-law was behind her, and both of them were pushing Mickey hard to work, plow and earn. Plow, plow, plow. When Mickey tried to go to other women, secretly hoping that they were stronger than Eva and would help him get free, the wife and mother-in-law went to the grandmother and read incantations together with her. Recently, the wife was diagnosed with cancer. She told Mickey, "It's from your drinking." Now she's in the hospital, undergoing chemo. Doctors say she'll be fine. "Do you write books?" "I write speeches for government officials," Mickey said. "They like to talk smooth, and they pay good money to look smart, and doctors need a lot of money." They were quiet for a while. "Will you bring your wife to the cottage in the spring?" said Veronica. "Yes," agreed Mickey. "She needs fresh air. Her mother-in-law will make apple jam, and the daughter will get bored and beg to go back to the city." He saw his whole life ahead of him, knew it wouldn't change, and he didn't try to change anything. His wings were clipped, not by conspiracy, by guilt. Veronica fell behind the group and got train tickets. She called home, and strangely enough, the phone was answered by her son, who had been so absent lately that he only came home at night, and not always. Veronica briefly informed him that she'd be back a day later and pressed off to avoid being questioned. Although John was unlikely to ask anything, he had little interest in his mother's life. Veronica had the bottom shelf in a compartment. The neighbors turned out to be pleasant. A girl student, going home for the vacations, she said, "I can't eat on the road. I get carsick. I only take fruit." And all the way in the compartment, there was the New Year smell of tangerines, which were carried by Aurora. And there were two young, well-mannered men traveling on a business trip. They could have formed a friendly company, drinking cognac or champagne and talking. But Veronica spent the whole trip facing the wall. She understood that such her behavior interferes with the neighbors, that it would be necessary to sit down, to move so that the men could eat at the table. But she could not. At first, the companions were quiet, thinking that the woman was asleep. Then they got used to it and stopped noticing her, like a log. No one met Veronica. She refused a cab at the station and walked, even though it was far away. She dragged her wheel bag behind her and felt how much she didn't want to go home. For the first time in her life. And she also realized that she wouldn't live with Billy anymore. Before, she'd looked for options, compromises. It could go either way. Now she realized she couldn't. It's too painful. She realized that before it was like living in someone else's body and trying to adapt to it. And now it's over. No more. John opened her mother's door. Veronica was again surprised that no one should be home at this hour. Billy was supposed to be at work, John at the institute. But the door was bolted shut. And there was a whole bunch of people home, her son and an unfamiliar girl, tall, red-haired, eyes wide, who had also gone out into the hallway to meet Veronica. And with her, a boy about 5 years old, very much like the girl, same carrot-colored hair. "Mom," John said, and Veronica's heart sank because it had been so long since her son had started a conversation with her with that word, Mom. "This is Nancy and Michael. Nancy and I got married yesterday." He swallowed nervously. In a hurry before I got here, Veronica asked. Her face was dead. It had turned into a mask. Veronica went into the kitchen, opened the refrigerator. The shelves were almost empty. Did they eat without me? She asked. If getting married was something that could be done in between for them, why should it be any different for her? She wondered about the groceries, whether or not she should go to the store to get them. In the evening, there was a family council. Nancy did not attend it at first, putting her son to bed. The rest of the family sat around the table in the kitchen. No one felt part of the whole anymore. Everyone was on their own. The family had fallen apart. You didn't come home because you were staying with her, with Nancy. Veronica asked her son, just like that. Mom, why are you surprised? Nowadays, dating starts where it used to end, and we sign our names so that no one would dictate later whether we should get together, split up, get married, not get married. We decided and we got married. Billy stared at his hands. I understand Nancy used to live with her parents, but now she's moved in with you. He already knew Veronica had told her husband she was leaving him. If he had any idea how to move on, he had to make up his mind in a hurry. The ground was out from under his feet. I won't share the apartment, Billy said. I'll buy myself something. A room, a small house. I'll sell the stock. He had an inheritance from his father, who'd worked in the North all his life. Before, Billy dreamed of traveling, wanted to see the world. Now he would invest in a house. And your mom? John asked. It was of secondary importance to him that his parents were getting divorced. What mattered was how would everyone be housed now? Would Nancy not be harassed? Would she be happy? The redhead left the bedroom, shutting the door behind her. The boy fell asleep. She had not said a word to Veronica all day, but presently she came to the table, took her seat at the family council. I have a proposal, she said. There is a cottage, grandmother's inheritance on Alapole. She willed it to me. I'll sign it over to you. You can move there and we'll stay here. She still didn't call Veronica by her first name or, God forbid, mother. Alapole, Alexandrovsko Pole, was the most shabby neighborhood of the city, all private sector. The new ones didn't build mansions here. There were no forests, rivers, or lakes nearby. There was no nature at all, only crowded wooden houses built in the middle of the last century. Those who went to Alapole left forever. It was almost impossible to sell a house here, to change it for something more decent. Anybody in Veronica's shoes would have made a scene, screaming and breaking dishes. You're kicking me out of my own apartment. You go ahead. Take out a mortgage. Get the hell out of here. Veronica thinks her son is leaving and she won't see him again unless she chases him around like a dog, baiting for attention. Nancy will turn John against her. She'll say your mother wants to stay in a 3-bedroom alone and shake us off like manure from a shovel. It'll be even worse if Billy leaves and they live in that apartment, Veronica and the young ones. Nancy's gonna look at her like she's nothing. And so day after day, month after month, because Veronica didn't want to fit into her plans. All right, I'll go to that cabin, Veronica said. It's got all the amenities. Nancy was generous with the explanation. We'll do everything through the MFC so it's legal. And there's no going back. Even Billy, indifferent to the household, looked at Veronica with surprise. He didn't think she'd agree. Just like that, in a few minutes, they had agreed to give the red-haired girl everything they owned, everything they had accumulated over the years. I'm going to go lie down, Veronica stood up. Her throat was dry, but she didn't want to start a tea party in front of them. Poured herself a glass of water, milky white from chlorine, and drank it in a gulp. The MFC opens at 9 tomorrow, Nancy said after her. The redhead's voice was almost benevolent. Perhaps she didn't think she'd win so easily. Veronica went into the bedroom without lighting the auror, made the bed, and lay down. Wrapped herself in the blanket like a cocoon. Soon Billy would come and lie down beside her, because he had nowhere else to go. And they would fall asleep, each turning to his own side. Everything was done surprisingly quickly, as if the final decision had been made not by them, but by someone from above. The paperwork was done in a flash. They always had to beg, to clarify, to run 10 times for each piece of paper, and here. Billy bought a 13-meter room. The house was a former dormitory. The room itself was well repaired and had a great view of the city below. but the rest of it was just a toilet, shower, kitchen, like a dirty, shabby dormitory from the 90s. Billy, too, had agreed to almost the first option that was offered. Each spouse was eager to get away, eager to be alone, no matter where. Veronica took her laptop and her duffel bag with her. John and Nancy didn't help with the move. The son needed to go to the institute, Nancy to the hospital. She worked as a nurse in a fee-for-service department, plastic surgery, the most expensive. Nancy explained the directions, gave her a bunch of keys. This is for the house. This is for the bathhouse. I think it's for the garage, the summer kitchen. You'll figure it out. Veronica got on the double, went to the terminus. She knew that the bus goes by the temple, but as if for the first time she noticed the golden domes, crossed herself, barely marking the movements, unnoticed by others. A new life was beginning. At first, the double was packed to the brim, and then there were two grandmothers left in the salon. They openly looked at Veronica. For many years of traveling to and from the city, the grandmothers already knew everyone who rode with them. This woman was new. The bus slowly made a circle and stopped. Here was the center of local life. Everything around it small, like a toy. A tiny grocery store. The sign said good. Even a barbershop was here. Veronica imagined that the same old ladies who rode with her had been coming here all their lives to get their hair done. And now the hairdresser had grown old with them and was cutting the client's hair almost blindly, groping their heads. This silly image could not be banished from her mind. Veronica wandered for a long time, holding in her hand a piece of paper with the address 14 Victory Street. Everyone who met her on the way scrutinized her. "What are you looking for?" Finally, an elderly woman called out to her, "I know everything here. I used to work here as a letter carrier." Veronica was embarrassed and instead of giving the address, for some reason described the picture Nancy had shown her on her phone. "I'm looking for a house like this. It's brown with blue shutters." There are a lot of them around here," the woman said. "Blue shutters everywhere, and the boards, you know, are brown." Finally, Veronica was told where Victory Street was. For some reason, even here, not everyone knew it. It wasn't even a street, it was an alley. There's a rich brick house with 2 floors, and next to it, her hut. A slanted fence, wooden walls, once painted in chocolate color, rowan trees under the window. Birds had not yet had time to peck all the berries, and red bunches looked out from under the fluffy snow caps. Veronica walked toward her house, falling through the snow as Mickey had done a while ago. Only there was no mother-in-law here, no wife. She, Veronica, was already virtually nobody's wife. Nancy had told her, "There's a gas boiler," but her son didn't stop. "Where will you go, Mom?" "A beggar's private house. Wait at least until spring when it gets warm." "You don't know how to heat this very boiler. Come on, at least I'll go with you. I'll show you." She couldn't even hope for the others. Mickey's in business, treating his wife and not trying to get away from her anymore. Billy sits under the dormitory roof, playing endless solitaire games. All he needs is internet and electricity. She had electricity in her cabin. Before that, Veronica fiddled with the lock for a long time, trying to find the key. It seemed to fit, but did not want to turn, and her fingers were already icy. There was not a single person on Victory Street, no one to call for help. Finally, she managed to open the lock, took it out of the iron hinge. A tiny veranda, or a hayloft. The floor's kind of sloping, and there's a pile of things the owners thought they didn't need. An old sideboard, not some antique, just a Soviet sideboard with tarnished glass. A broken Viennese chair, folded mats, some basins, rags. The kitchen was semi-dark, the only window overlooking a high board fence. The walls, painted with green paint, the Ager refrigerator, covered with mold inside, a 2-burner stove. Veronica turned the light switch, there was light, but that was all. Fool, she hadn't even asked if there was water in the house. Apparently not. There was a cistern over the rusty sink, a bucket on the floor. To the right of the kitchen is a small room, half dark too, with a window overlooking the same fence. All that fits in here is a narrow bed and a double closet at the foot. And how cold it was. How cold it was everywhere. Veronica went into another room, bigger and brighter, with 3 windows, and completely empty. Only an oval mirror on the wall greeted her as she entered, and there were probably icons hanging in that corner. No one had lived here for a long time. The wallpaper had seen both the cold of winter and the heat of summer. It had peeled away from the wall, bubbled in some places, smudged in others, blackened near the floor. But these light-colored squares, did icons have been taken down, maybe sold, or given to the dead old woman's friends, to those who were still alive, to pray for her soul? On the floor, the books were stacked haphazardly. They seemed to have been swept into a corner like trash. There were old textbooks. Who had Nancy been studying with them? As she straightened up, Veronica took another look in the mirror and thought she saw something flicker in it. She jumped up startled, looked. For the next half hour, she walked around the cabin, knee-deep in snow, inspecting her possessions. The wooden toilet booth door wouldn't close. The snow had to be shoveled away. The garage is cracked all over the wall like a zigzag of lightning. Some terrible barns adjoining each other are completely dilapidated. The roof on one of them is falling through. It's dark inside, and everything is piled up with beams, boards. And on the other opposite side of the house, there was an annex, and there was a new lock on the door. Of course, there's a gas boiler inside. It was necessary to sort it out, to ask someone to turn it on, to call a master. But it was getting close to evening, and Veronica knew that no one would do it today. How could she spend the night? She was terribly cold. But again, she wandered to the bus terminus. The double was waiting for passengers. The biggest temptation was to get on and go home. Take a bath, lie in a warm bed. But Veronica knew that, by and large, it was no longer her home, and no one was waiting for her there. Her son wouldn't care, but how displeased Nancy would be if Veronica returned. In the hardware department, Veronica bought a heater. In the food department, tea, sugar, a 5-liter bottle of water, bread, and sausage. Now at least she would be able to spend the night. If she closed the door to the small room, it could probably be heated. Afterward, she could never forget her helplessness and the tears that came to her throat that evening. How she washed her plate and knife over the bucket, cut sandwiches, made tea in a half-liter jar. How she'd fallen asleep, crawling into bed right in her coat, and kept trying to warm the cold, damp pillow with her cheek. She woke up often during the night, probably every hour, and she heard a dog howling somewhere nearby. It couldn't be a wolf, though it was not far from the forest, but still there were streets, houses, people. The dog howled so deafeningly and hopelessly that it seemed that nothing could take away this longing. In the morning, Veronica realized the frost had struck. The small heater was already completely useless. It could not heat the room to a temperature where one could live. Veronica was freezing to death. Her icy fingers made the mistake of pressing the phone buttons. She called the gasmen. They told her to wait for them to come, check, and turn on the boiler. Veronica really wanted to go at least to the store. There was nothing to eat, and the store was warm. But she was afraid that if they didn't catch the landlady, they would turn around and leave, and she would not survive the second night in such cold. Veronica stepped out onto the porch, and her cheeks were immediately covered with frosty flames. Her eyelashes turned frosty. Veronica decided to clear the snow from the path to the outhouse where the boiler was. She went around the house and aghast. There was a beast sitting on the neighbor's property. A huge white dog, the likes of which she had never seen before. It didn't even look like a dog, more like a lion. There was no fence between her and the dog. The fence was just a grid, which the beast could swing over in one leap, or topple if he threw himself on it with his chest. Then Veronica noticed that the dog was on a chain. The chain was thick iron, but it was short, so she could not run, could not stretch her paws. And the box was not a shelter, but rather a pen, 3 walls and a roof. So that's why you were howling, Veronica said quietly. It was freezing, and you had nowhere to hide. A man wouldn't have hurt her, but the dog wiggled his ears, showing that he heard every word, and he kept looking at Veronica. And there was not in his eyes the fierce rage of a dog who had spent his whole century on a chain and was already going mad. Veronica read in his gaze, staring at her, wisdom and willingness to endure until nothing could be changed. Near the dog, now Veronica remembered the breed of alibi, stood one bowl, shallow, empty. It was probably used for food. There was no second bowl for water. How do you drink? She asked the animal louder, Or do you just eat snow? Wait, I'll be right back. She brought some leftover sausage and bread. It was scary to approach the dog. Veronica threw the food. She had never been very good at marksmanship, but now the dog caught the food in the air and swallowed it without chewing. And Veronica had no water at all. She could sit down next to the alabaster and chew snow. When they came to connect the boiler to her really young guys, she paid them extra and asked, "I understand, not your department, but maybe you can tell me how to get water here, where to get it from." She realized that now, cold, tired after a sleepless night, not wearing makeup, she seemed to them just an ingratiating old aunt. One of the guys, the one who was pocketing the money, replied condescendingly, "There's a water pipe down the street, landlady. If it works, you can get a bucket from there. And I thought I saw a well at your place. There, the lid is flat. Check it too." The water from the well flowed in a small trickle. It took Veronica a long time to fill the bucket, but now that the house was warm, she thought she could manage the rest. She put things in the closet. She took the table from the kitchen into the big bright room. This would be her workplace. Veronica had long ago left the editorial office, found a customer for whom she wrote stories. The customer sent stories. Veronica filled them with flesh and blood, tried to tie them to life. She herself called them Indian stories. Unprecedented coincidences, twins, villains, macho men and beauties. Evil was invariably punished at the end, and all the undeservedly humiliated and insulted gained wealth, happiness, and love to the grave. For her, it was an income that allowed her to feed herself. After lunch, Veronica took a break. She looked at the house that had been given to her with different eyes. She would live here, maybe grow old together with this house. Veronica felt a sense of peace that she was alone. She didn't think about her son, her ex-husband, or Mickey. Each of them had chosen their own path, and her frayed nerves needed quiet. Veronica heated water, poured it, warm, into a pot. When she went to the store today, she bought food not only for herself, but also for her dog. She'd never had a dog. She didn't know what to get. So she randomly put a bag of Chappie in her basket. The animal lay in its place, right on the snow, curled up, paws tucked under its body. A pot of water was steaming. "Will you have lunch?" Veronica asked the dog. She moved closer, and the dog stood up. What was in this movement of his readiness to take food? Or a threat? A message to the uninvited guest not to cross the line? Veronica set the pot on the snow, searched with her eyes. Then she broke off a withered branch from an apple tree and used it to push the water toward the dog. How thirsty he was. He forgot about everything. Greedy gulps. He licked the already empty pot. He sniffed the torn bag of Chappie and walked away. When it started to get dark, Veronica was still working. The silence soothed her, and now she realized that she needed to be alone for a long time. She got up to pour water into the small electric kettle she had bought today. She glanced in the mirror and shivered. It reflected the same room she was standing in now, the same semi-darkness with only light coming from the kitchen. But in the room beyond the mirror were things that were not there. Veronica could see the edge of the table and the brocade tablecloth hanging from it, and a sofa against the opposite wall. And on the couch sat a man. She could not make out the features of his face, but she could see that he was not yet old, dark-haired, and looking straight at her. Veronica remembered the fortune-telling her grandmother had told her about. "It's scary," she said. "Before divination, you must take all the icons out of the house, and then light candles, put 2 mirrors opposite each other, sit in front of them and wait. And then maybe, sometime later in the mirrored corridor, you will see a man who is coming to you. That's what your soulmate will look like. But as soon as you look at his face, you have to turn the mirror over. Because if this man reaches the border and steps from the mirror into the room, he will kill you. You can't mess with the unclean." And now Veronica's first thought was to turn the mirror upside down too. But the man in the looking glass rose and went out. Through the door that in Veronica's world led to the kitchen, out and gone. It seemed to her that something would happen in her destiny, some change would come. And the next day, when the phone rang, she realized that they had begun. She was even more surprised when she heard her mother's voice. "I'm sorry I'm unannounced. Grandma Selena said, I'm just warning you. I'm coming to see you. and I have a very important conversation to have." "But, Mom," Veronica exclaimed, "I'm not home right now. I mean, no, I am, but I live somewhere else now." She didn't tell her mother about her divorce or about moving to a dilapidated house. She didn't want to upset her. She felt that her mother would try to interfere, to reason with her grandson, and it would not end well. Mom was already at such an age that she had to be protected from negative information. Veronica had a premonition that the time would come when she and her mother would have to live together. There was no way she was going to put her dear old lady in a nursing home. "Well, you'll explain everything to me later. Grandma Selena was in a hurry. I'm on a train. The connection is not always good. It breaks. Give me your address. I'll meet you there." A few hours later, Veronica was already at the train station. She could not wait for the train, literally strolled along the platform, and when the train finally arrived, hugged her mother tightly. "How much I missed you." When they were in the cab, Veronica asked, "Don't faint. Yes, the house is old and dilapidated, but it's all mine now. Maybe that's what I wanted in my old age, not to owe anyone anything." She knew that Mom was really hard to scare. Selena had been through a lot and had survived it all, and yet she was afraid of the older woman's reaction. And in some ways, she was right. Grandma Selena walked around the house with her lips pressed together. "Are you sure you did the right thing?" she finally asked. "What do you mean?" "I mean, you probably know in your heart how this is going to end. John's not gonna last long with that skirt chaser. And it's not even about him. It's not about Nancy bending him to her will. It's about her. Today, she took your family's apartment. Tomorrow, there won't be enough, and she'll have nothing more to take from John. She's gonna split the place up, put your son in some closet. He'll give in to her, too, like an honorable man. And she'll go off to find a new goldfish. Someone who can give her more, and then more, and then more. And a house like you have now, it takes either a lot of money or a very capable man's hands. Do you have either of those things? Mom, you always say all the right things, but you're very ruthless. What if I hadn't gone along with the young ones and my son had reproached me for ruining his life?" Grandmother Selena looked at her daughter over her glasses. "What would you break it with, I wonder? By making the boys live in cramped conditions for a while? Why not? Let them test themselves to see how strong their feelings are. And if they split up, thank God, don't you think? Betty, there's something you're not telling me. I think it was so important for you to get rid of everything at once, especially your husband, that you gave up. You said you'd do anything to be free." Veronica faded into silence. Then she said, "Perhaps you are right here too." As they drank tea, Grandma Selena rubbed her forehead with the palm of her hand. "The changes in your life make it a little difficult to have the conversation I came to have." "What's wrong?" Veronica's voice was fearful. "Maybe Mom has some kind of health problem. You see, I wanted you to foster a boy." "What about?" That's something Veronica never expected. "Listen to this first." And Grandma Selena told her daughter the whole story of the family. That Angelica had wonderful young parents. But first, the boy lost his mother, and a few years later his father. Angelica should never be left to her stepmother. It's amazing that no one has sounded the alarm so far. Starving child is ready to eat dog food. Only Angelica, unlike the dog, has a sense of dignity. He does not complain, does not beg, takes only what from his point of view no one needs. And recently the baby almost died of pneumonia. The stepmother, it seems, was afraid of being prosecuted. And now she wants to follow through, give up custody and send the boy to an orphanage. And that's not the case. Angelica has a heart of gold. He needs a family. I just thought there was only one person I could trust him to, you. John's all grown up now. He's got his own life. And you could be a mother to that boy. But now the commission is coming to look at houses. Will they let a child live in those conditions? Mom, I'm shocked at you. I can't answer you right away, but I promise to think about it. For the night, Veronica tried to make her mother as cozy as possible. She turned on the heater, laid clean linen, brought her another cup of tea with lemon, and for a long time they sat talking about life. It wasn't just that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Even if they called or visited each other, they could not be as frank as they were today. Grandmother Selena felt she had no right to interfere in her daughter's life anymore, even though she didn't like it, and she thought Veronica was unhappy in her family. But this was the path her daughter had chosen for herself, so the mother should have stood back and only watched. Veronica realized that her mother was right about the most important thing. But the young woman thought she could not change anything yet. She had a husband, a son, and only now Betty felt free, as in her childhood. And at night she dreamed again of that dark-haired man who was looking at her carefully, as if waiting for something. "What do you want to tell me?" Betty asked him. He did not answer, but then a blonde-haired boy came into the room and sat down beside the stranger. They began to talk animatedly. Veronica could not hear what they were talking about. She awoke again with the same strange feeling. If before, tired of everything that had happened, she thought that there would be no changes in her life, she would have to live out her life. Now she had a sense of meaningfulness of what was happening. Realization that the main thing to do is yet to come. And one must save one's strength so that it would be enough for everything. Grandma Selena didn't spend the night in vain either. She hadn't given up on her idea. But now she was thinking about it in light of the changes in her daughter's life. And perhaps some of it was for the better. "Well, have you thought of anything?" she asked Veronica. "First, we need to go to look at the boy, to get acquainted with him," said her daughter cautiously. "You know, you cannot command your heart. It's not that we may not like each other, but just immediately realize that we are strangers, that no mental intimacy between us is impossible." "Of course we should go," seriously said Grandma Selena. "But about mental intimacy, you talk about yourself. Angelica is still a little boy. His heart is ready to open to anyone who is kind to him. And I wanted to tell you something else. If everything works out, let's sell everything. I'll sell my apartment, you sell this house, and we'll move in together. We'll have enough for a modest little house on the outskirts, something we can live in right away. That's where we'll bring Angelica." "Oh, Mother," said Veronica, like a little girl, "I'm so tired." And for a long time she sat with her head on her mother's shoulder, thinking of nothing, only feeling the warmth of the hand that embraced her. There used to be a big balcony in the children's hospital, and the children undergoing treatment used to lie there for a long time, breathing fresh air. The hospital was near the forest. That is, the balcony, of course, was still there, but it had turned into a warehouse of junk, and the entrance to it was closed. When Angelica recovered, the doctor advised him to walk. "You look much better now, brother, than you did when you came to us. You're not so malnourished anymore. You got a blush on your cheeks, and your labs are pretty good. Why don't you get out a little bit? Walk around the building once, then a couple times the next day, and then you'll get up on skis," the doctor joked. He knew the boy's story and sincerely wanted to help him. The only thing he didn't take into account was that Angelica didn't have any clothes with her in which he could walk around the hospital park. But Aunt Mallory, the nurse, figured it out. She gave him someone's old down jacket and big boots, but they could be worn. "Now I'll find another hat," she said, dressing Angelica. "Here, look. It is, of course, pink, girlish, but who is looking at you?" When Angelica opened the heavy hospital door, the cold air seemed intoxicating. The boy even swayed a couple times and grabbed the door jamb. Just beyond the hospital building the forest began, and the pine trees in their white decoration were fabulously beautiful. Not far away, a man in a sweater and in a Shanka hat was brushing snow. Angelica also wanted to work with the snow. Together with her father, they used to make a huge snowman in December. But the boy realized that this was no place for fun. Still, he decided to approach the janitor and asked him, "Can I help you?" The man looked at him carefully. He had dark hair, but Angelica thought he reminded her of her father. "You probably can't hold a shovel," the man said. "You're so small and skinny. Are you allowed to go out, or did you run away?" "The doctor told me to," replied Angelica seriously. "Don't worry, I'll manage." "What are you saying, brother?" "Well, hold the dustpan then." And Angelica enthusiastically began to clean the snow with an iron scoop. "Do you work here as a janitor?" he asked his new acquaintance when they both took a break. "Yes," said the man with a strange intonation in his voice. "I have nowhere else to go. I don't remember anything, my brother." "What do you mean?" "I wish I knew. The local medics told me that the ambulance brought me here. They found me on the street, early in the morning, with a brain injury. The investigator came by, questioned me, but there's no hope they'll find who did it. since I can't remember anything myself. Probably hit him on the head, robbed him, and took off. So what are you gonna do? The man talked to Angelica like an adult, and the boy liked it very much. The doctors explained it to me. It's a long job ahead, brother. They'll restore my documents, and if I don't remember anything, they'll put me in a boarding school. Is that like an orphanage? Well, yes, the man grinned, but there are not children there, but adults. Then maybe I'll learn some business, get on my feet. Why are you talking about orphans? You're not one of them, are you? Aunt Lucy kicked me out anyway. She and Katie don't need me. I don't have anywhere else to go. Tell me, brother, about yourself. Angelica's story made a big impression on his new acquaintance. If I could help you, sighed the man. Wait, do not grieve. When my memory comes back to me, I'll get you out of this orphanage. What's your name? Angelica asked. Here I was called Barry. The man grinned sadly, but call me that for now. Angelica, meanwhile, was staring off into the distance. Barry leaned on his shovel and looked too. Two women were walking slowly down the hospital alley, an older one and a younger one. Grandma Celine, whispered Angelica, and rushed toward her, spreading his arms so that the government puffy coat on his chest flared open. At the last moment, he tried to slow down, realizing that he might knock the old woman off her feet. But he didn't succeed. Luckily, the second woman supported Grandma Selina under her elbow. Where are you running off to? Grandma was hurriedly zipping up the boy's clothes. It's going to blow you away, and you haven't even recovered yet. Betty, meet my Angelica. The boy looked at Selina's grandmother's companion and saw that the woman looked like her, only younger, but she had the same blue eyes, and she was already taking off her down shawl to throw it over the boy. Barry watched the scene and smiled. He realized that something had changed in Angelica's life. Not so long ago, the boy was afraid that he would be sent to an orphanage, but apparently, now it does not threaten him. And Veronica couldn't take her eyes off Barry. He was the same man she dreamed about every night. Until Angelica was discharged, they had spent a lot of time together every day. Veronica, her future foster son, and Barry. A woman took it upon herself to help a man who had lost his memory. And soon she managed to find out who the man was. Surprisingly, his name was indeed Barry, and he came to this city on a business trip. And he lived next door to the very house that Veronica had gotten, and he owned the white alibi. In the absence of a man, the neighbors were afraid to untie him, only to feed him. The family came together after about 6 months, and now, in a clean wooden house with carved shutters on the first floor, lives grandmother Selina. She chose this room next to the kitchen. I'll get up in the morning, cook breakfast for everyone, make pies, she used to say. Angelica moved in next to her. It was not without difficulty to solve all the issues with the papers. But now the couple, Veronica and Barry, are his adoptive parents. The boy grew up and got stronger during this time. Now he looks amazingly like his father, but his eyes are blue like Veronica's. And now Angelica doesn't want another family.